this computer. All right. There we go. All right.
That's a lot to do at 9 o'clock in the morning there,
I
Dale.
know. Try to get all that going. I'm telling you. Well, how is everybody this week? Y'all look bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Not yet.
Somebody said, why don't you start earlier on Saturday? I was like, well, it's pretty rough early. I don't know if people can take it or not. We'd all have to turn our cameras off.
Yeah.
Hey, Lordy. So I hope everybody's had a good 2 weeks since we saw you last. I've been grading work. I've been very pleased with the work, the thoughtfulness of your responses. I've got a couple things that I want to cover. So that just for some clarification, I want to tell a story on Birdie this morning, her part of the world. And so I'm glad that Beverly is back with us and that her daughter is doing well. So that's a blessing. So that's good news. Is Brenna with us yet? I don't see her on the screen. And so when Brenna pops in, or if she pops in, y'all be sure to let me know. We haven't greeted her yet, and so we want to make sure we do that today. I want to kick us off this morning, as I normally do, by us looking at our weekly schedule. So I will share my screen and we'll get started. So looking at our weekly schedule, we're now at Saturday, February the 5th. Today, we're going to talk about Salkine chapter 1. And we can do a test review if that's important to you. Many of you have not taken that test yet. I can do the review prior to that. And then we're going to do case study 16 today, which is always my favorite, is case studies. And then we're going to briefly look at Excel today, and I have uploaded a 30-minute tutorial that a gentleman does that will help us with the basic functions and formulas that you potentially could use down the road. Now, I know that many of you will not do any kind of analysis, like an analysis of variance or regression equation. So we're not going to dive too deep into that. Now, if you want to get into that, as I said, well, I'll do that with you individually, but just basically how to use an Excel spreadsheet, because Qualtrics, and the reason why we do this rather than SPSS is Qualtrics will download into an Excel spreadsheet. And that's the way most businesses use their data. And we're not going to do a lot of, most of you won't do a lot of analytics anyway, but if you want to, we can do them inside of Excel. But the main thing is just basic how to use a spreadsheet and formulas and functions. Formulas are things that you tell it to do, and functions are already built in. It's just formulas that are already built in. And so we'll do those things. Looking down the road, when we meet again in 2 weeks, you'll have your case study 16A. Please remember, let me close that and go over here. Please remember that I have under case study materials, I have your groups, and please be sure to rotate your responsibilities. So for the first case study, obviously group 1, Richard, group 2, Ben, and if you didn't do it that way, that's okay. Just make sure that everybody gets the chance to be the leader, the person that communicates, sets up the Zoom, does whatever. Make sure that you rotate through those. I know Bertie was the leader of her group this time, and next time it'll be Chiffon. And then it will be Angelique and then Joanne. So rotate through to make sure that each of the 4 case studies that you get the opportunity to lead that group. So make sure that you do that. And so that's where we are and what we're doing. I got, actually came in this morning. I got a wonderful reflection this morning. I want to make sure that I got a lot of good work, but this one caught my eye this morning. This is from Sharice. And what I loved about her reflection on the first case study is she talked about, she started using the tools from previous semester. She understands, as we all should, that what we've been doing in the first 4 courses, we've been building our toolkit. We've been learning these different things. And now in the methodology course, you're learning how to deploy them. You learn them from a theoretical or, standpoint to begin with. And now the practical application of those things, and she went through several of the things. I led with questions suggested by Collins, as Tori suggested in her TED Talk. I attempted to abandon my default mechanism. The 5 whys, I began to use that as best practice method. And so she basically went through all the things that she has learned during her time in the program, that she's now seeing, oh, this is how I will use those things in analyzing this case study. Now, the beauty of it is, the whole point of analyzing case studies is get you to understand how you will go out and analyze your partnering organization when you start trying to provide assistance to them through your consultancy. Remember, we're doing action research. Chiffon texted me this week and said, I'm here meeting with the partnering organization. What do I need to ask? And here are the 3 things you need to ask. And that leads us to where we want to go. What's your pain point? What keeps you up at night? What's your most pressing need? What do you perceive as your problem? Those kinds of questions is where we start. And then you begin to kick in this tool set that you've got. And basically starting with the hypothesis, well, maybe this could be that. Then research questions. Research questions tell us exactly what data we need to answer those and what form that it comes in. And so we're starting now to put it all together. When we go out there and we're with our partnering organization, we're starting to go back and review our toolkit, the things that we have learned, and say, will this apply here or there? What can I use here or there? They believe it's this. Let me check and see if that's exactly what we're trying to do, or what the data that we need, or is that really the problem that they have? Now, as I've told you, unfortunately, their perception of the problem is not always real. And so last Wednesday, since we met last, we had a faculty meeting at Gardner Webb. And for whatever reason, they decided that we would not sit in the big auditorium all spread out, that we'd go over and get in Tucker Center and sit in one another's laps to have a meeting in the middle of the pandemic. But okay. And then and our task, we were given a task to do at the end of the faculty meeting, which has never happened in the history of Gardner Webb. You always go in, sit in the auditorium, try to get in a place where the sun is not coming through those big windows and burn you up like an ant under a magnifying glass. You try to find you one of those, a seat that's not in the sun, direct sunlight, and you try to sleep and not snore to bother anybody else. And when it's over with, you get somebody to wake you up and you leave. That's pretty much the way it's been, since the beginning of time. But unfortunately, this time they decided we're going to get them all together and put them around tables. We're going to give them activities to do. I was like, I've already been through 4th grade. As you introduce 4th graders to cooperative learning, once you get them through 3rd grade, you begin to start cooperative. I thought I probably wasn't the best student in the class. I was the biggest, but I probably wasn't the best student in the class. But I've already mastered cooperative learning. But I got the opportunity to learn how to do that again last Wednesday. And so, but our activity was retention. What can we do to retain our students at Gardner Webb? Undergraduate students. And so we got in our little work groups after we had the general business session, and it's amazing to me that in the face of overwhelming data, people have narratives that they just can't turn loose of. Again, we have personal truth, political truth, and objective truth, and their personal truth that fits their narrative and fits what they do and do want to do and don't want them to do greatly overwhelms objective truth. And so at my partner Steve Laws at his table, one of the ladies, she started out the conversation with, well, there's nothing that we can do as a faculty for student retention because that's determined by food service and dormitories. Yes, you should have to wear a helmet and a sign, but she believes that. She absolutely believes that that's what's wrong in the organization. That the reason why undergraduate students are leaving, and the ones that we get are leaving in droves, is food service and dormitories. And the reason why she says that is that she's heard the students who are still there complaining about that. But that's not a stay or go thing. But she believes that, and doesn't understand that it's because of lack of engagement in her class. And so I had at my table, I had a nursing lady, and she said, now, of course, she started her reply with, of course, I don't do this, which means I absolutely do this, is that they will not take a phone call or an email after 4 o'clock each day until 9 o'clock the next morning from a student. And that their justification is I have small children. And I can only be bothered between the hours of 9 and 4. And I reminded her, quite gently, I thought, that when we go back to social systems model, whether we look at Denison or whether we look at Getzell's Guba, the people say, what is social systems model? It's very simple. It starts with the notion that what the organization needs for you to be able to do is what you will or want to do. Now, the organization needs for these people to be available and to create connections, bonds with these students, but they don't want to do that. And their notion is if I don't want to and I have an excuse, then I shouldn't have to. But the organization needs for you to. These young people are leaving in droves because they've got no emotional connection. It's not about food service dormitories. It's about they're not connecting with others in their class. They're not connecting with their professors, their instructors, and so they're leaving. But we don't want to. Our personal truth is I shouldn't have to do that. If they don't get in touch with me during the day, well, they're in class during the day. They don't have time to do those kinds of things. And they've got to come during my office hours, but they're telling them that you don't matter. And these young people are leaving in droves, but they have all this anecdotal information, or they have these personal truths that they believe that are preventing them from making connections with these students, and they're leaving. And so therein lies the organization's problem. So if you ask the organization, these people, they'll tell you our problem is food service and dormitory. but it's not. But when you do a little bit deeper dig, you understand that they're not making any kind of connection with these students. And that's why they're leaving. So you say, well, Dale, what tells us that? Well, we have plenty of data from studies, but we understand why people stay or go. It's either satisfaction or dissatisfaction. Very simple. So let me share that with you. I've got kind of a little primer this morning I want us to look at in that notion of again correctly identifying the problem is really important. All right. Factors for satisfaction. Again, as I've told you before, the reasons people stay are not the reasons that they go. Factors for satisfaction: feeling of achievement, meaningful work, challenging work, increased responsibility, recognition of accomplishments, advancements, opportunities for growth. You have to be engaged in order to get those things. Factors for dissatisfaction: working conditions, quality of supervision, company policies, salary and benefits, status, job security, relationship with superiors or peers. That's the reason why you go. If you don't have those things, you go. We know that. This is not rocket science. And so, again, my challenge to you this morning, and if we start out wrong to begin with, we'll never be right. It's the whole thing. And I can't belabor this enough. You've got to do the correct problem identification. That's 90. When one of these goes bad for us, and they do every now and then, these things go bad. And when they go bad, it's because we incorrectly identified the problem. Now, sometimes they go bad later on when we tell them the truth and they don't want to hear it. But by then, we're done. That's on them if they don't want to hear it. But what generally happens where these things go bad on the front end, when we can't retrieve them, we can retrieve it on the back end. As I've told you, when you collect your data, you're good. But they don't want to hear what you have to say. Immaterial to our purposes and action research. But where they go wrong on the front end is incorrect problem identification. We listen to what they tell us. They tell us anecdotal things. They tell us it's food service and dormitories. They've got no data that shows that. There's plenty of data that shows that it didn't. They use bad technique to collect that data, or it's personal opinion, or it fits their personal narrative. Or they do the stupid things. They use the wrong samples. Let's look at samples right quick. Remember sampling? They ask kids that are still there what was wrong. Well, the kids that are still there are still there. They're not the right people to ask. They didn't ask the ones that left why they left. That would be more relevant. But there is this notion that this is what it is. It's something external that we don't have to worry about. Because that makes it very, very easy for them. Let me share my screen and go to this one. I've got it queued up as well. And this one is also under our weekly for February 5th. It's this sampling methods. Let's see if I can find it. Aha. And when they cite their data, it's a convenience sample. Participants are selected on the basis of proximity, ease of access, and willingness to participate. There's nothing wrong with that if what you're trying to measure is a characteristic of that group. Let me say that again. There's nothing wrong with a convenience sample if what you're trying to measure is a characteristic of that group. But you can't ask the ones that stayed why the ones that left, why did they leave? Because that's not a characteristic of that group. Right. Therein is where we get sideways in our consultancy, in our actions research. They've talked among themselves and decided these things that fits their personal or political narrative, their truth. And I'm not just talking about Democrat and Republican. political truth. I'm talking about the politics of organizations. This fits our truth. So this is what we're going with. This is my story and I'm sticking to it. That's what they do. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've had students walk into organizations and the personal truth or the political truth of the people in the organization had nothing to do with their real problem. Now, let's go back to that lady in nursing. If she acknowledges that it's personal relationships, if she has to change that, what is the blowback on her? What does she know that will lead to? If we as an organization abandon this stupid idea of dormitories and food services and really get here and we start digging and we really do come up with the reason why students are leaving, why does she need for that not to happen?
It probably points back to her and her work.
And she's gonna have to change.
Or leave, or the organization is going to separate from her. I'm going to pick on nurses for a while this morning. Now, I'm a big fan of nurses. A lot of the folks that come through this program in the nursing school, and probably my favorite of all time student in the DEOL program, Jessica Ivy, came through this program is in the nursing school. Jess is a great person. I just love her dearly. I think she's just the most special ever. She's like my youngest daughter. But one of the reasons why you understand that nurses gravitate to Gardner-Webb is for the working hours. If you're in clinical settings, what happens to your hours as a nurse if you're in clinical settings? You might have to work nights. You might have to work weekends. You might have to rotate shifts. What's the beauty of coming to work at Gardner-Webb? You can work from 9 to 4, and you only have to be on campus on certain days. And that really fits well if you have children. So we could never broach the topic for them. It's just their political, and personal truth is it can't be us. It can't be that we don't connect with students, that we're only here a little bit of time, and that we won't take calls or emails or texts after. We won't give out our phone, and we won't do any of that after 4 o'clock, because that's the whole reason I'm here. Because my need is to do this. Now, if the organization realizes that I can't serve the client system by what I do for my needs, then there's a conflict. I've either got to change or I've got to go. And so they have a political agenda that we can't talk about personal connection, giving out phones. We can't do that, because eventually that'll burn our house down. We know where this is going to go. And so we turn the narrative. And so every time that you get together with a group, whether it's formal like last Wednesday or informal, the first argument that is advanced is, this is not our problem. It's food service. I think they must give them a card to read from over there. But the arts and sciences people are exactly the same way. The arts and sciences people, which teach all the core classes, they're exactly the same way. That's their mantra as well. They've joined forces with the nursing school, and this has become their mantra. It's not us. Nothing to see here. Not me. Didn't do it. It can't be us. It has to be these things. Now, I freely acknowledge that it's been a day or two since I was in college. It's been a long time. And I tend to disremember. But when I was an undergraduate at NC State, just as I got there, they closed the dining hall. I shed great tears over that. They closed the dining hall. And if you didn't live at the College Inn, and you couldn't in your first 2 years, you just kind of on your own. And the places that we had to live in, again, as undergraduates, they didn't have an athletic dormitory on campus. They had the College Inn when I was an undergraduate at NC State. And even if you're an athlete, you didn't get to live there until at least you were a junior. And so you lived out in the cheapest dormitories on campus because they were paying for them. And so you lived in the places that, didn't have running water. Just had a common bathroom. I mean, awful dormitories, no food service. But I don't know that we knew enough to know that was an issue. Again, I know kids are different now, but I didn't go there. I didn't pick the college, or they didn't pick me on the basis of food service and dormitories. We never knew any different, didn't think any better. Now, I know kids are different today, several generations between me and them, but I don't know, the data's pretty clear that kids don't pick the college on food service and dormitories. And they certainly don't stay based on those things. So you can't point to any data that tells you that, but it's become their mantra because it fits their personal and political truth. Now, I've belabored the point this morning, but folks, that's going to be the problem when you go out and partner with organizations. They have a personal and political truth. They have some sacred cows in their organization. And all you can hope is that they're somewhat realistic. Most of the time they won't be. And remember, hope's not a plan. So you've got to have a plan to go behind them and check, and to make sure that they've correctly identified that problem. We start with that to give us some clue of what the area is, but we cannot just out of hand accept their notion. Because again, they factor in those things. Everybody's got a family and is an employee, and they factor those things in, and that distorts their view of what's going on. This is, Gardner Webb, and I don't want the other nursing ladies under the bus, but this is not unusual. This is the usual in organizations. And so back to Sharice's narrative reflection, you've got to use all the tools in your toolbox to determine if they're telling you the truth or not. You can't help them. Now, they don't have to like it when you give them the objective truth, the action plan, the results, the recommendation from your consultancy. That's up to them if they accept it or not. But you can't let them determine what you tell them. They won't want to hear this. This will make them mad. And don't fall into that trap is my point, is when you start either consciously or subconsciously entering bias in because you want to shape the outcome. This is going to be really bad. So I had lunch this Wednesday. So this Wednesday was general faculty, was College of Ed faculty meeting. And so I was on campus and I had lunch with main bean counter for the, as the people call us, the Geek Squad. I think we're officially called the Surveyors team, or what. Anyway, it's the people who are interested in numbers on the campus. Institutional effectiveness, the VP for institutional effectiveness. We had lunch this week. And he said it's getting harder and harder to produce reports because I know that folks won't want to hear them, won't want to see them. But I can't change the numbers to make them happy. But that's what we're talking about. Even when you have people in the organization who acknowledge the numbers, they know that there's a political piece of that. They're not going to be happy. And so I told him, what you need to learn to do is at 4:59 on Friday afternoon, you need to hit the send button. Don't send it first thing Friday morning. That's on you. That's just your dumb ass for sending it at 9 o'clock on Friday morning and stirring everybody up. Send it at 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon. That instead of changing what's in it, just change when you send it. They still won't want to hear it, but by the time Monday, maybe they've cooled off a little bit. He said, well, I get emails in the middle of the night. Well, don't answer your email. There you go. I fix that problem too. Just turn it off. If people don't want to hear it. But therein, again, this is real life situations, folks. Folks don't want to hear and see the numbers. Now, I'm gonna pick on Reed for a minute here this morning. The police, and I use that term as a generic term. One of the things that they do a lot, and Reed's part of this, and I'm gonna make sure I'm an equal opportunity offender. I want to make sure I get everybody. One of the things that police do is report statistics, crime numbers on a regular basis. That's kind of their stock and trade. Reed, would you acknowledge that's pretty much what folks want to hear and see from the police department is numbers?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's all about, they're worse than school people. I mean, schools, the first thing we have to tell people in the school business is, in leadership, is it's all about test scores. Now, if you don't believe that, get out now. If you think it's okay that, if you're one of those people that think that, well, standardized tests aren't really reflective of what kids know, and some kids just don't test well, and get out now. If you can't produce numbers, you won't stay, you won't last. And as a sidebar, I didn't do well on tests if I didn't know anything. If you know things, you tend to do pretty good on tests. That's a fallacy. That's a personal and political truth that is not true either. That some kids just don't test well. If you don't know anything, you don't. If you've learned the material, you tend to do pretty well. But there's this notion throughout the school business that permeates it, especially with mamas, that my kid doesn't test well. No, your kid's an idiot and it's hereditary. That's the problem. That's why your kid doesn't test well. I can tell you right now, there is no such thing as don't test well. Unless you don't know any better, you don't know anything, then you don't test well. But it's not an impersonal test. And it's amazing. Again, we have all these things. Contrary to popular belief, every celebrity does not have dyslexia. Some of them are just dumb. But every one of them tells you they've got dyslexia. That's their personal truth. I didn't do well in school because I had dyslexia. No, you didn't. You're just dumb. That's just the way the world works. You can't support this notion with data, but we have all these truths that run through it. To get back to reading the police department, if you don't think it's about numbers, let your crime statistics go up. Let the number of those go up, and see how well you're received. And so, but my point in that, and picking on Reed this morning, is it's all about numbers, but we have to look behind those numbers. But what everybody does is they kind of just weaponize the numbers one way or the other. They change the metric, and obviously I'm leading up to our case study. Yeah, ice cream consumption goes up. But we change the numbers, or we change the metric according to what we need, or what we do. And here's where I'm going to backhand Reed and his bunch. When they're presenting numbers, many times they will present the metrics that show them in a good light in terms of what a wonderful thing that they're doing and how they're decreasing and making their community safer, except when they go to budget people. And then they use a different metric when they go to the budget people and request more money, because police departments are just like schools. They don't have funding authority themselves. As you know, in North and South Carolina, school boards are unempowered. They can't levy their own taxes. They have to go to either the county commissioners, or the 14 city districts in North Carolina have to go to the town commissioners and with their budget and say, please fund this. And the police have to do the same thing. They have to go to a funding authority along with other public services to get their money. Now, when they're trying to show their effectiveness, you should keep us employed and we're doing a great job for you, they show one set of numbers or one metric. But when they go to police, to funding authority and say, we need this, it's not the same metrics. If you go into the county commissioners and you say, look, what a great job we're doing. We've done this, this, and this. We want more. And the question would become, why do you need more? Here in Cornelius, where I live, on the southern end of the lake, the very northern part of Mecklenburg County, we had a town commissioner here. He's got reelected. He was off for one cycle, but he's got reelected, and he is a military veteran. And he is a staunch conservative, but he pointed out, why are we continuing, if we're having all this success with our public services, why are we continuing to increase the budget so that we have to increase taxes and evaluations in this part of the world? We can't just continue a growth budget forever and ever. We appreciate our public services, but we need to look at, if they're being successful, why are we continuing to grow them? Again, conservative, military veteran, big supporter of the police. But the notion here is if your metrics are good, why you want more money? You thought he'd lit people on fire. They voted him off for a cycle. He's back on again now, but people get angry over that. But but his question was, if your data is good, why do you need more? To the point of the first year of the pandemic, this house that I'm sitting in right now, my property evaluation went up $160,000, not to 160. It went up 160 from where it had been before. The value of this house went up $160,000 for tax purposes. But we got, but my problem is I don't mind them hiring more officers. I think that's wonderful. But do all of them need a brand new car? Did we need a new fireboat? And all of them have a car and an SUV, and now we've got these urban assault vehicles and 4x4s. We just buy more and more stuff to have to keep up. And policing is about, as I think Reed would say, it's about relationships as well. And so we had a fellow on the board who said, if your numbers are good, we can't just keep on giving you a growth budget on and on. But the police don't want to show bad numbers. They want to show bad numbers then, but they want to show good numbers about their effectiveness. So you've got to watch folks, and it's not just police that do this. But most organizations keep two sets of books. This is your Uncle Deol telling you the truth here. Most organizations keep two sets of books. One that's real, and if they're smart, they do. One that's real and one that's for public consumption. And what you got to get is to the real numbers in the organization, not the ones that they put out for public consumption. You can't be the village idiot and accept whatever comes along. You're going to have to maybe dig a little bit. And therein comes your toolkit, your analysis. Now, did we ever get better? We did not. All right, I want to talk about measure of variability for a minute. We talked about mean, median, and mode in our discussion boards this week, that we use mode most of the time. We need to know what people selected, not the average of what they selected. Again, the mode tells us a whole lot more when we're doing survey work that's categorical, especially like satisfaction work. How many are happy? How many are sad? Not, again, 6 happy, 6 sad. If we just do an average, we just get 12 ambivalent people, but they're not. 6 are happy and 6 are mad. We need to be able to display that. We do that with mode, but here's the problem. In order to hide that, what do unscrupulous people do? Again, shading the data for one way or the other, for whatever purpose that they're doing it for. Again, we want people to keep us and continue to employ us. So at evaluation time, here's these great numbers, but at budget time, here's these bad numbers, we need money. So we understand that a lot of times folks will use average rather than mode to kind of hide bad things. And they do it intentionally. They figured that out. And so, but by looking at measures of variability, we might still be able to get to the truth of the matter, the objective truth of the matter. Even if we don't have the mode, if we know how many picked, I'm happy, and how many picked, I'm mad. If all we've got the average, the mean, the average of those, if we look at variability, the measures of variability, which are range, standard deviation, and variance, if we can determine those, we can get a better insight or picture into what's real, objective truth. All right, so what is the range? So our scale is 0 to 100. We'll use that one. The range is from the lowest score to the highest score. And then standard deviation is the average distance from the mean that scores fall. And variance is just the standard deviation squared, is all it is. So back to a survey that was done that's going to be in the next case study. On a scale of 1 to 4, the average, or 0 to 4, the average was about 2. But if the standard deviation is 2, what does that tell you? That pretty much all the scores fell at one end of the scale or the other. There you go. So there's a way, even if they give you data that intentionally tries to deceive you, if you can, there is a statistical way that you can figure these things out. Where if you know that the standard deviation is 2 on a scale of 4, and the range is 4, you've got a bimodal population. Half of them are happy and half of them are sad. Which would take the place of, if you actually knew the mode and saw 6 were happy and 6 were sad, you could figure it out statistically if you knew those things. So these are tricks of the trade. You're trying to get to objective truth. People are trying to keep you from getting there. It's the nature of the business. Everybody, wants to advance their narrative, their personal or political truth. Everybody wants to advance that narrative for purposes of their evaluation, their compensation, their funding. Everybody has a vested interest in shading the data. You can only be successful as a leader or a consultant if you know the real numbers. You got to know your numbers. You can't deceive yourself. And that's what's important. So as we go into our first break this morning, and we're going to get to a case study early, I want to tell you a story on Bertie's part of the world. So Bertie's down from Greenville County. So if those of you who aren't familiar with South Carolina, the first real aristocracy, and I did say that word, aristocracy in South Carolina. I know that's an oxymoron, but the first real aristocracy in South Carolina was in Charleston because of the port back in colonial times. But the other place where the aristocracy settled was in Greenville County, was in Greenville. That's where the really wealthy and well-to-do people outside of Charleston, the planters and the farmers, the aristocrats kind of were in Greenville County. So Greenville has always been a very upscale place in relationship to the rest of South Carolina. It really has. That's probably a backhanded comment. So one of my previous DEOL students in a really good group that I had on main campus, Jade, she partnered with the Museum of the Upstate that chronicles life in the upstate since, since colonial times. It's a really, really upscale museum in downtown Greenville. I don't know if Bertie's ever been there or not, but it's a really neat place, and it chronicles the history of the upstate. This is where the landed gentry, the wealthy people, the textile barons, this was their home, and it documents that. It's a very blue blood kind of place, and so she partnered with that. And back in those days, you could go out without fear of dying from COVID. And so, since I had them in 730, I started that group. I went out and visited all their consultancy places eventually. And I went down there, and when we got through, we were walking the parking lot. I told Jade, I said, this is not going to go well. I'll just, we're early on. You can partner with somebody else, but the young lady that we just met with, their director of programming there, I said, she's dead man walking. She won't make it through the rest of this year. And Jade said, what are you talking about? I said, well, back to our first case study. What is your metrics for success in a nonprofit organization? And it was a classic case going into our first case study today. Where does the Museum of the Upstate get their funding? They have two primary sources. One is all those blue-haired ladies that live in Greenville that make really, that have family money. Some of it's probably so old it's probably Confederate money, but they've got money from way back. And that this is their passion projects. And the other is that the town of Greenville funds them. And the county of Greenville funds them. Now, here's the rub. What do the county and the town who use tax dollars, what are they interested in terms of clientele for the Museum of the Upstate? Bertie, I'll give you the first shot at this. What do people who are funding with public dollars, what metric are they most interested in, would you think?
Satisfaction?
Pardon?
Maybe satisfaction of
Nope.
how it's presented?
Nope. Not the public funders, Sean.
The number that they're serving.
That's it. They put a turnstile up. I mean, it's this nice, really upscale place, and they put a turnstile like a movie theater up. But the county required them to do that. And I was like, well, that's about one of the more inappropriate things I've ever seen. This really upscale, tremendous building, black tie kind of place, and they put a turnstile like a movie theater up front. But they were required to by their funding authority. And so the county and the city that was sending money, all they cared about was how many times that turnstile turned, was that number. Now, those blue-haired ladies that made up the board, that wrote checks themselves, what did they care about? Back to Bertie, what did they care about? They cared about the programming, the quality, the displays that were curated. They have a set number of rooms with displays, historical, but they bring in things of interest as well. Because I mean, if you're in the museum business, you have displays that rotate, and you get certain ones. And so this young lady came in as their director of programming, of content, and was and her charge was, you got to make that turnstile turn. We're not turning it enough, and the commissioners and both town and city are talking about cutting our funding back. The ladies over here, on the board, they don't care about the number, that they care about the quality and what you're bringing in. So, but the town and the county are on us about, we're not, nobody's coming in. And so, to our first case study, therein lies your rub. You've got part of your funding authority that only cares about the quality, how well, client service, that kind of thing. But you've got politicians over on this side that are elected, the public will, taking care of the public money, being a good steward of that money, who's saying, we can't continue to fund you if nobody comes to see these exhibits. And so this young lady who got this job obviously had not been through the DEOL program and done the first case study. So she brought in a comic book display to get the numbers to turn. And can you imagine the clientele that it brought to this upscale place? Oh my Lord. It looked like the Walmart on Saturday. I think somebody was doing laundry and they had a barbecue going in the parking lot. I mean, this crowd, oh my Lord. I went down and saw. And the blue-haired ladies were just incensed. I don't mean they were a little bit mad. Oh, they were mad. And of course they fired her. Well, I mean, what else you got to do? I mean, she turned the turnstiles. You just said we needed numbers, but this funding authority on this side cared about what the numbers were. The counties, according to them, would just make them turn, and she made them turn. But can you imagine the Comic-Con crowd that came? Some of them were in costume. I went down there on Saturday. Oh my Lord. I know that all of you know I'm not habitué of TV, the Big Bang Theory and that. I mean, and Comic-Con and all that bunch, and what anime and that's the crowd that this brought in. Blue hair and nose rings and all that stuff. And oh my Lord. And those ladies on the board of directors saw that crowd, and you could smell them from out in the yard. Saw that crowd came in. It blew the whole thing up. As Pastor Joe just said, it just blew the whole thing up. And so therein lies your problem. That's a real life story that happened to one of your colleagues that came before. And all of a sudden, what do you do now? The person that you're partnered with got fired. And they ain't too happy with you either. Now, you didn't do this, but you were associated with her. But that's their political truth, is they didn't want the Comic-Con crowd in their nice, upscale facility. But the only issue, or the only solution that this young lady knew, was to get something that was popular, but it was popular with the wrong people. So therein lies your problem when you start determining metrics for organizations. It's not as simple as what do you want? What do you want? All right, we'll go do that. Because sometimes what each side wants is in direct conflict with the other side. These are all lessons learned in consultancy. These are lessons in organizations. Organizations have constituents, and you wonder, how in the world could these people be involved in the same organization that have completely different agendas? And the whole notion of the first case study, everybody circle back to communication, but again, if we have different objectives, just talking won't fix it. And so hopefully we've come up with some solutions. Communication is a good answer, but it's only the start. So hopefully we've come up with some good solutions for today. All right, I think I've covered everything that I wanted to talk about prepping our first case study today. And we'll dive deeply into that. Again, I put a link in today's lesson to a 30-minute tutorial on Excel. It's wonderful. We'll probably cover that next time. I want to make sure that you've covered that piece of it. I don't mean to be ugly, but the reason why is some of you have not been able to obtain your books, and I get that. They've been hard to track down. And so this will kind of fill in that gap for that section. If you hadn't got your book, if you'll watch this 30-minute video, it covers that entire section. And thankfully, it's not me doing it, but it covers the Excel section in chapter 1 that many of you haven't been able to get to. And so I linked it. I put a link in under today. Let me share that right quick so you'll see it.
If anybody doesn't have the book, just shoot me an email. I can screenshot. I've got all mine in ebooks, but I can assist you just to get you covered.
I also have a link to it, to the entire book, if anybody wants it.
Yeah.
please.
And so I put an Excel tutorial here that covers in a very succinct way that entire section. For those of you, some of you, learn better visually and auditory. He does a good job. He's got, I don't know where he's from. He's got a Canadian accent, but it's not unbearable. And so that's a good thing. And so when we come back, it is now 9:55. When we come back at 10:10, we're going to jump into our first case study and the very first group. Who's the first group?
I think we are.
And so group one is Richard, Doc, Brenna, and Heidi. You will lead us off at 10:10 this morning. I'll see you back then. And we're back. All right. All right, group one, I'll be taking notes and asking questions. I'll try to, unless I just lose my grip, I'll try to wait till the end of your presentation to ask most of them. And so, and then in turn, Dr. Neal and Dr. Burgess will have questions. Then I'll let them take the lead on the second and third presentations. And so group one, we're ready. Share your screen when ready and start your presentation.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
Share my
morning.
screen.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Brenna. Good morning.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for being flexible with me today.
No worries.
All right. So, Richard, you ready?
Can I try one more thing? I can't see my
We're good.
notes. Let's see if I can open it one more time so I can see it on a different screen.
Okay.
Okay, can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So our group is me, Brenna McCormick, Heidi Neely, Richard Brown, and Doc Dillard. Our case study was the case of the Community Action Network. So we're going to start with just a quick summary. The Community Action Network and its member organizations are struggling to find that balance between the nonprofit sector and the business world and the accountability they need to have for their funders. They have secured a consultant to assess these challenges and figure out some possible solutions. There were 3 major learning objectives for this case study. We wanted to understand the complicated issue of measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. And that's kind of what we felt was our big central problem in this case study. We also wanted to recognize the tensions in the nonprofit sector between business-like approaches to organizational development and a more holistic approach to service provision. And then finally, to learn more about the role of communication and the social construction of organizational effectiveness. So to address some of these learning objectives, we took a look at the discussion questions that were provided for us. The first discussion question asked us what would be some recommendations that we would give this organization. We did come up with 5 recommendations, including implementing satisfaction surveys, pre and post assessments, developing a shared standard language for communication purposes. We wanted to invite our stakeholders to kind of get their hands dirty and really see what the nonprofits were all about, determine the why behind the programming, and then develop measures of effectiveness and designate methods of accountability for organizational effectiveness. But ultimately, we believe that measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector requires collaboration between the nonprofit organization and its stakeholders. As a team, they should develop this strategic plan so that there's understanding of expectations on both sides. The second discussion question, back up one slide, asked us, what does it mean for organizational effectiveness to be a social construction? In an article I read, kind of defined social construct as something that exists not in objective reality, but as a result of human interaction. It exists because humans agree that it exists. So both the nonprofit and its funders must understand that they're the ones who are going to set the boundaries on what effectiveness is, and whether that's financial success, community impact, or both. They've got to decide what it is they're after and what indicators of success they are going to be looking for.
All right, another discussion was talking about the stakeholders, and we talked a little bit, Dr. Lamb talked a little bit about that this morning. You know, the Board of Trustees, the ladies with the old money, volunteers, employees, all of these people have a seat at the table with the nonprofits. And so a lot of them are looking at how effective the organization is, the responsiveness to people who want to be a part of that organization, and how they continue to be effective is to continue to look at the mission of the organization. You have to stay focused on the mission, because that is what, at the end of the day, the nonprofit or whatever organization it is about. And you can go to the next slide. Okay. So challenges for the organization. With everyone who is at the table, as we saw in our case study, we have people who are about the numbers. How much, what's the overhead look like? How many people are being served? How much money is being raised at the, these galas or fundraisers? We have those people who want to know this. We also have those who are donating money, and they think it's a good cause. We want to, give to this organization because what it does for children or people. They want to know that people are satisfied working there, that the volunteers are treated well, that the clients are being taken care of, and that the goals and objectives are being met. And these are two constituents who want to know what the outcome is going to be. Some is numeric, qualitative, and other is quality. The next slide. And so as part of the outcomes, how can, if you provided financial support, what would you want to see accomplished with your money? And a good way to do that is to send out monthly newsletters or emails to say, hey, this is where your dollars go to this part of this organization. For those who want a more qualitative report, here's the annual report. Here's what the overhead costs were. This is how much we still have to work with, or this is how much we need. So in this case study, learning a lot about the nonprofits, and then also causing you to go back and look at that mission. When people don't agree with where their money is going, go back and look at the mission to see if this aligns with where you want to send your dollars.
Excellent. So as you can see, a lot of our discussion was centered around that shared understanding of what the language is. So when we were looking at the particular problems for this case, one of the secondary problems that we identified was communication practices, making sure that there's a shared language that is developed from that strategic plan. And we know that the strategic plan is very essential, very vital for the overall organizational health, because it allows you to have a baseline, have timelines, be able to track particular goals for the organization. So that was our secondary problem. And that leads into our central problem, where we mentioned that the nonprofit and funders essentially need to be on the same page in order to understand the balance between mission and business practices, thus leading to understanding measures of effectiveness. We will discuss further on how that's so vital, whether it's for understanding an environmental scan or understanding the current status of the organization, or whether we're trying to determine the feasibility of future projects. So it's very necessary for them to start at that baseline with the strategic plan and communication and make sure that they're on the same page.
Now that we've heard some of the challenges that's been had, experiences of that the text put forward, we've come up with 3 possible solutions, and then some evaluation on the pros and cons of those solutions. So the first is measuring the effectiveness of the organization using pre and post assessments and satisfaction surveys of the clientele. SurveyMonkey, in the real world, SurveyMonkey is a tool that people use to collect data, to collect information via surveys or assessments. They make a very good case for surveys can help the organization in a very cost-effective way gauge interest, gauge feedback, and gauge perspective of the clientele or whatever stakeholder group they're hoping to serve, so that organizations aren't going to circles on the same thing over and over again and not appealing or appeasing any stakeholder group. The good thing here, the pro, is that this gives the organization some real content to deliver back to their funders and say, hey, look, according to our clientele, we're succeeding in this way. Your dollars are effective in this way based on the responses from the people we're serving. The challenge here is that these organizations are already underfunded and understaffed, so it may create an additional burden for them to kind of live out what they're hoping to achieve. The second possible solution is inviting organization stakeholders such as funders or philanthropic partners to get their hands dirty. In real life, we've seen this play out. Some really good examples of getting your hands dirty with all stakeholders. We can think of Habitat for Humanity or the United Way, where they really invite everyone to come in and it really levels the playing field so that everyone is creating this kind of shared understanding of success. In the text, we hear Professor Lewis's concept that effectiveness is really a socially constructed idea, and it's achieved by all stakeholders, creating this understanding through interactions and communication. If we have all the people working together, they're creating shared experiences. Those shared experiences could lead to shared understanding of what effectiveness looks like. The challenge in this scenario, though, is that one, funders or philanthropic partners may not have the time or ability to really engage in ways that people who work in these organizations do. And the second is that it's a best practice that oftentimes funders, board members, and others don't get too involved in the organization because it muddies the responsibilities of the practitioners who know how to do the work and the funders. It becomes unclear that it's not a best practice at all. The third option or third possible solution is this idea of inviting. The third one is determining why behind programming. To really evaluate why are we here, what do we hope to achieve, and let's really measure our progress towards achieving those things. This approach can really help organizations or nonprofit organizations create data towards what they're hoping to achieve and hone in on those things only. This also helps them kind of focus in and alleviate themselves from programs or things that they're doing that really don't contribute to the bigger goals they should have been working towards. There's an article that we've included in our resources that really talks about the use of analyzing best practices and analyzing your programs towards your why. Again, that's in our resources or in our citations. I will speak from a personal experience. Every year for Thanksgiving, my mom, her church, and my nonprofit organization, we feed the hungry. Not always homeless people, but some people are just hungry on Thanksgiving. And every year we go out our way to buy games and books and coloring books, all these things to create this kind of family environment for people who are coming to our Thanksgiving dinner. Every year, those books and toys end up on the floor, in the trash, nobody used them. And that really wasn't part of our why. Our why was to feed people, but we were stressing ourselves out and creating additional costs for us and getting gains and things. And when we kind of evaluated it, we didn't need that. It wasn't core to what we were hoping to achieve. And it wasn't helping us with anything at all because people just threw them away. The challenges with this approach, though, is that, again, it creates additional labor for an already understaffed and underfunded organization. And this sense of accountability could change the culture of nonprofit organizations to make it seem more corporate-like, which oftentimes is not consistent with the nature of nonprofit organizations. Our preferred solution, we lean heavily on that third option of really determining the why for organizations. Why are you doing what you're doing? And let's put some things in place to help organizations measure their progress towards their why. As you can see on the screen, there's a few things here that we've kind of broken down and a timeline to go with those things. So a strategic plan should be put in place that really, again, gets to the why and set some things in place to measure your reach towards that. And then the last thing is developing some sense of accountability. So identifying people who will lead, who will champion certain parts of our reach for the why, and have an ongoing evaluation of our progress towards those things. Not just to think of, we determine what we want to do and then let's go do it, but let's come back every so often, annually, every 4 to 6 weeks, to determine what is our progress towards our why. These are our citations or our references. And that's in the conclusion of our presentation.
Excellent. All right, so let's go through some notes now. So we started out with the notion of social constructivism. What is a social construct? Somebody, anybody, from the group that just presented. Again, what is a social construct?
So my understanding of the social construct is that it's something that exists because society says it exists. So
it's agreed upon.
Right. Everybody in society agrees. And in this case, it's effectiveness. So we, as stakeholders, have to agree this is what's effective, and how are we going to measure that?
That's exactly right. So let's look at who stakeholders are. I wrote this down from your presentation. The board members, the board trustees, the funders. Sometimes people have more than one role. Your professional staff, the people that are getting paid, your volunteers, and then there was one that Richard alluded to, which is in some nonprofits, the founder, the person whose idea, the progenitor of this project. So you've got all those stakeholders, and they have to agree what the social construct of this organization is. And it goes back to Bertie's example this morning I used in Greenville. What if that's in direct conflict? What do you do then? Now, I've told you, it's never good to do focus groups with bimodal populations. And what that means is, in the case, the Greenville case is, if we get together and put these stakeholders together in a focus group to try to come to some accommodation of our social construct of this organization, if they are a bimodal population, that means they're on either ends of the spectrum. You got one group over here that don't want those dirty people in their building. You got this other group over here that demands that you get people in the building. Do you think that they're ever going to agree? Probably not. Therein lies your problem in social constructivism. The notion that we'll just communicate and that'll fix our problem. No, not really. And so what you have to do as the consultant many times is you have to do some training with these people. to get them to a place where you need for them to be. And part of that, as was also mentioned, is what I refer to as operational definitions. We have to have a common agreed upon language to start with. If you remember back to last time, those of you who probably still remember that nightmare, the last class session we had, we started with our operational definition. We started with our terms so that we all had a common language. And so pretty much what you have to do, you can't just get people together and decide, well, because it turns into either, again, a confirmation bias, everybody's on, nodding, or everybody, or a fist fight, one or the other. And so the way that you avoid that is you have to start by defining your social construct. You have to have operational definitions. You have to have terms, and just throwing them out there. You may have to do board development. You may have to do volunteer indoctrination and not so much indoctrinate. What's the term that I'm looking for this morning? You may have to do staff development with your professional staff. You may have to go through an induction process with your volunteers. You may have to do board development. You may have to do a budget session with your funders, like city, county government. But you may have to do all of those things individually before you can get them to come and sit around the table. Therein lies your problem. Too many times, what's the first thing we do? We just invite everybody together in a bimodal population, what we simply call a focus group. That's a technical term that we use. And it ends up being, people throwing stuff. It ends up being a fist fight because we haven't done the background work. We assumed past the problem. Like my wife, I told you that story. She assumed that the issue was attaching the antenna to the chimney. Nope, the problem was getting up on the roof. That's the problem with social constructivism. We start out with bringing everybody together and we think we'll just be able to hammer it out. Oh no, that will not go. It's much more involved and in depth than that. That's what you should have learned from this case study. If we got to get all these people together, we've got to do work with them as individual groups and to get them prepped to bring them together as a group of stakeholders. We can't just say stakeholders and think that that's one monastic or one homogeneous group. Stakeholders have all have different values, goals, aims, desires that is specific to their group. And so you have to break them down. You can't just say my social construct is this. We have to do education for each of those, or induction with each of those groups before we can then bring them together and start developing a common language or a common mission for the organization. The vision is your own. The mission is determined by your stakeholders. Always remember that. People ask me all the time, what's the vision mission? We don't put that although we verbalize that or we write it down, vision, mission, they are two completely separate things. Always remember the vision is your own. The mission is determined by your stakeholders. And that's when that's especially relevant when you have a founder of a nonprofit that is still involved with that nonprofit. They started this based on their vision. But your mission and carrying it out can only be done if all the stakeholders are on board. So don't assume past the problem in organization. You may have to break it down and do several different training sessions, and they won't be the same for each one of them. But you've got to get every one of your stakeholder groups up to speed. Now, I've got surveys. Richard, I think, mentioned SurveyMonkey. We use Qualtrics. But I've got a volunteer functions survey. We've got professional staff surveys. We've got organizational surveys. We've got all these different things where we can gather some information and individualize and tailor their training to get them to the point where we can bring them together as a body, and it won't end up being, hair pulling and eye gouging. That's what you're looking for here. Again, what didn't happen in the Greenville example is There was no board development, there was no work. And many times we select board members because they are funders, they are patrons. And so they have a vested money interest. But that group didn't do any work with all the different stakeholder groups. So the professional staff, you know, all they knew to do was make the numbers go up. And that's what she did. But the board wasn't happy because they were part of the funding. They wanted something different. But if we had done some development with all these different groups, there's a chance that we could have avoided the conflict that ensued and the fallout of firing professional staff. But that damaged the organization. You know, if you are a person that's in that line of work, and the person that was there did their job and got fired because they got their job, you might hesitate going there. And so they kind of set themselves back in their organizational path, you know, their success, because I mean, this person came in and did what you told them to do and you fired them for doing it. I mean, I don't know that I want to work for people like that. But they did not have a clear vision of their organization, and they had not agreed upon the social construct. The work had not been done behind the scenes, the board development, the volunteer inventories, all those things, and it got sideways, as those things kind of do. Again, I would caution you about using SurveyMonkey. It's a great tool. But when we're talking about, when we're doing it as professionals, Qualtrics has an IQ score. I want to show you that. I won't get too deep into Qualtrics this morning. I'll share my screen. Share. And you all have an account. We'll go over it later. Participants can now see my screen. Good. All right. So if you go to your Web Connect main menu here, there's a first-time user for Qualtrics. I've shown you that, and I'll sign into my account this morning, and I'll pull up and put that out of the way. All right. You see why we didn't use this one? It was an earlier iteration of this before we got it better. That's why I pulled this one up. You notice there was no responses because we didn't use this one. Why didn't look at this screen and somebody tell me why we didn't use this one? I'll give you a hint. Look at the top right.
What, is not anonymous?
Nope.
It says it's fair.
Fair.
That's
Okay.
right. That expert review score is only fair. That's not. What does that speak to, by the way?
Speak to the effectiveness.
No, not effectiveness is a combination of two things: validity and
because the
reliability.
options-
Right.
Right.
The
So-
options, because there's middle ground,
I beg your pardon.
the number of options they can choose from, because there's a middle ground. They're not choosing either or. Like it
Well,
should be
see,
even.
that's part of it. Yeah. So that expert review score is the validity score, and it measures three types of validity: content, construct, and faith. It measures those. All right. So let's start with the first one: content validity. What is content validity? Does it measure what is the content of the questions and the ways that we can score them? Is that a way that that data is usable? as Bertie pointed out, 7 choices, no. We should have done a 4-point scale there. So that makes the score go lower. What's the construct? The overall construct, are we measuring it? The overall construct is do you want to volunteer? What would make you want to be a volunteer? That's what we're doing. And then face validity is, are our questions and answers consistent? For example, if I answer yes to any question that's a yes, no type or agree, disagree, yes, the question always should be written so that if I answer yes, that means I want to be a volunteer. And if I answer no, I don't want to be a volunteer, regardless of what the question is. You know, sometimes when I get these forms to fill out, as I do every day, referencing students for jobs, one of the things that kind of aggravates me is say, is there any reason why this person shouldn't be hired? And I have to answer no. But the questions should all be, if I'm recommending this person, everything that I answer should be a yes. That's face validity. And so the better districts have had somebody do this the right way, and every yes answer means, yeah, I would recommend this, and every no means no. There aren't any written backwards that the appropriate answer, if I think this person should be hired, is no. There should never be any questions like that. That speaks to face validity. So what happens when you create a survey in Qualtrics versus SurveyMonkey? It checks face, content, and construct validity for you. And if you don't get an above average score, if you get a fair score, then no, you should not use that, because the data is not going to be the data is not going to be usable. It's not valid. And remember, you're professionals now. If you send out a survey, it should at least be valid, and you should do it reliably. So again, lunch on Wednesday, it was suggested to the VP for institutional effectiveness that he should change when he sends surveys out, when he sends them out. And he said, okay, explain to me why. He said, well, and the response was, if you will send surveys out at graduation time, students tend to be a lot happier and you'll get better results. I can't make this up. Now, this is a person who has a doctorate that should know better than that. What's wrong with that? Does that speak to reliability in any way? Well, of course it does. So he was being asked to do what? Put his thumb on the scale and compare data from just a regular time to the data of a happier time, so that the data would look better. So when we deploy these surveys, that speaks to reliability. But the survey itself, the beauty of Qualtrics is it does our validity check for us. And we should never publish and share and deploy a survey that's not above average on that expert, what they call the IQ score, ever. You know, if we're just surveying our friends, or we're doing something as a one-off or just as personal, but if we're doing it in a professional capacity, we should never send out surveys that we have not checked for validity, ever. That's
Dr.
where
Lamb,
that comes in. Yes, sir.
I had a principal not too long ago actually entered the room prior to the teacher working conditions to give her opinion on what should be answered.
Yeah. oh yeah. Yeah, that doesn't affect reliability at all. Now, it doesn't change the instrument, which is valid, but it changes the reliability.
You're right.
You know, this is what you should answer. Oh yeah. But that happens all the time. Again, back to Deol's top 10 ways to cheat with data. And not be honest with yourself. And see, the one person in the building that should want honest feedback on a teacher working condition survey is the principal. That's the one person that should want honest survey information in order that they could act upon it. the test is not, or the survey is not what's important. It's what you do, and it's what it represents. Yeah, Talia said she experiences. Of course you have. And so our undergraduates at Gardner Webb who are training to be teachers, they have to take the EdTPA. And it's a performance-based exam where they have to put the materials in. It's a predictor of their effectiveness as teachers once they get out into the field. Our problem with our undergraduate folks is that they've become focused on getting them to pass the EdTPA because they can't be licensed if they're not. And so their goal, and this speaks to goal displacement that Richard also brought up today. So the goal of the undergraduate faculty is to get their students to pass that exam. That's their entire goal. But that exam is simply a predictor of effectiveness once they get in the teaching role. So which is more important, passing the exam or being an effective teacher? Now, if your effectiveness as a provider, and remember you're a subcontractor to DPI who license these people, Department of Public Instruction or Department of Education in South Carolina. If you are a subcontractor to them, again, they're a stakeholder in this. What are they most interested in? They're most interested that when those young people go out and get in the rooms that they're effective. And so they have a performance score. And so here's the problem with what's going on. The EdTPA pass rate at Gardner Webb is 100%. The effectiveness score of first-year teachers, according to their formal observation, is just slightly less than 30%. Wait, what? The predictor score says 100% of them are going to be effective teachers. The actual performance score, which is the one that actually matters here, is less than 30%. It's at right around 27, 28%. Well, wait a minute. How's this happening? Is the test not valid? Is it not a valid predictor? Is that the problem? Is the problem with the test then? Somebody, anybody? Is this a validity problem? Is the EdTPA not valid?
It's a reliability.
There you go. This is a reliability problem. So what are we doing at Gardner Webb?
Or maybe they just test really good.
Do what?
Maybe they just test really good.
maybe they just test really good. Nope. So what are they doing? What do they do every month when the turn-in time comes, when students are to upload their materials in this? What do? They get together in what they call a boot camp.
Put their thumb on the scale.
Exactly what they do. They call them all together and put them in a room, and they sit and go over their materials, and they change and fix it and upload, and you give them templates to use, and they upload the stuff that they know is going to pass, whether it's the students or not. They make up forms and templates and just give them stuff. Here, put this in, put your name on it, put this in. Does that affect reliability, you think? Now, they don't have a problem with that, because they said our job is to get them to pass the exam. No, your job is to get them to be effective teachers. We've gotten goal displacement. The goal it should not be the EdTPA. It's just a predictor. The goal is actual performance. There's nothing wrong with the validity of the EdTPA. It has been validated 7 ways from Sunday. The problem is the reliability. It's not designed for you to get together in a boot camp situation and tell people the answers here, put this in. I mean, we're literally giving them the answers and having them enter it in.
I mean, I've seen that pretty much in every.
Leah and Sean were talking about. The principal is trying to give them the answers to put in on the survey that they want. We're cutting out the middle. We're doing it directly, because we reject the notion that teacher performance is what we're looking for. We're just trying to get them to pass the exam, so we just give them the answer. I'm sorry, I interrupted somebody. Go ahead.
Oh no, I mean, I was just gonna say, Dr. Lamb, I mean, we see that all the time, and I don't know if it's just not even at university levels, and but I mean, in our college level, I mean, I don't even know if people are going to do it at their general employees, whether you're in education or not. I don't know, just kind of an odd situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think part of that gets back to what Dr. Lamb was kind of tongue in cheek about before, organizations having two sets of data.
Yep.
Oftentimes the evaluations that we give employees are exemplary and everybody's doing a good job, but that doesn't match up with our outcomes that are declining. So you have those two sets of data that we need to work to get to mesh, but they're also for two different purposes. So every organization has something like that at some level, it seems.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we're running two sets of books. I mean, that we're running two measures, and that's what's happening with the Ed TPA at Gardner Webb. We're running one book, which is our public face, 100% pass rate. This is our public book that we want everybody to see, 100% pass rate. We're giving them the answers. But on the other end, we're not talking about the 27, 28% effectiveness score, performance score once they're out in the building. Ouch. If you're hiring our people, which are you most concerned about? Whether they pass this predictor test or whether they can actually do it? And so we've got goal displacement, but yeah, you've got to get to the real numbers, because most organizations cook the books, and evaluation is perfect. Is perfect. So my buddy Joey Burks retired recently. We were running mates back in Charlotte a long time ago, and I became a high school principal before he did, but he eventually became a high school principal after I was in the central office. He eventually became a high school principal at North Macon. Everybody loved Joey. He was a good fellow. And but we got a new superintendent. And the world changes. And so I was there at the central office. They'd make us go to principals meeting. We had to go one every now and then, but principals meeting in Charlotte-Mecklenburg is a big deal. You put on your best suit, comb your hair if you got any, shave, clean up, because there's media there. And so, you're well turned out, you're well dressed, you don't swear or dip snuff or any of that, you're on public display when you go, when you go to principals meeting. And I mean, it's a big deal. And so the new superintendent came in, and he was having his, he had done his, what is it, the first 90 days or whatever, where they go in, when a new leader comes in and they dive into all the data. And so, everybody was milling around before the meeting. I happened to be there. That's why I said it was the first one of the year. And even though I'd moved to the central office, you still go to the principal's meeting, see old friends and all that. And I was there. I was say for the general session this morning, I'll go back to work. And I was standing there, and Birch and I were, telling Barney stories from Mayberry. He's a big Mayberry fan. The new superintendent came by and spoke and said, asked Joey to sit down in the front row of the principal's meeting. And I was like, oh, this can't be good. And sure enough, and so when he got to that part of the program, he pointed out, he called him by name and pointed to him, and the camera went and said, here's a principal that does not have one teacher. Got 200 teachers, large high school. Got 200 teachers, does not have one teacher on an action plan. That's the public face of that. But here's their performance data. They're low performing school, and not one teacher is on an action plan. They're all above average. They're all exemplary. They're all accomplished. But their data says they're not. We're going to stop this. We're going to be honest with the public about, basically we're going to stop keeping two sets of books in this district. And of course, Joey, he was in a new job the next week. That he was, the public example of, we will not keep two sets of books. You will not present your school as everybody is, it's like Wobegon. Everybody's, good looking and above average. But your performance data says they aren't. Now, he was a highly unpopular superintendent for having done that. Everybody loved Joey. But the message was clear. And this is the message that I have to give young principal, in waiting candidates is, if you can't let a teacher go, that's a good person, simply because they can't teach, then you can't leave. Because why do we hire you for? What do they do at Jones Sausage? They make sausage. What do you do in public school? You teach kids. Performance matters. And you don't get to decide what the metrics are. Those are decided for you. And if you can't do those things, then we can't let you be in charge of this organization. And if you can't enforce that, you can't run two sets of books. You can't have this is the data for one group, as I threw Reed under the bus this morning. You can't go to the community and say, look at our policing numbers, they're wonderful, and then go to the county commissioners and pour them out in order to get money. You have to have one consistent message, and most organizations do not. It's your job as the leader or the consultant, in whichever role you're in, to make sure that there's one consistent set of books. That we look at our performance data, we look at our metrics, we agree that everybody understands what they are, that our social construct, and you may have to do some work behind the scenes in training these people and all these different stakeholders to get them on the same page. You've got to do that. And you may have to do something like should have been done with United Way in Charlotte Mecklenburg, where you train the professional staff, don't steal the money. Here's an idea. Don't steal the money. You'd think that would be assumed, but according to court records, it wasn't. They didn't know, they claimed when they went to court, that it wasn't okay to steal all the money. But they said nobody ever told us that we couldn't do this. They didn't tell us that. Nobody told us that we couldn't hire our friends and relatives. Nobody told us that we couldn't give ourselves raises, or that we didn't have travel budgets and hotel and accommodations, that there was a limit on what a hotel could cost, or how much we could charge for mileage, or those things. Nobody told us that. It's not our fault. When it came to light that the executive director in Mecklenburg County was taking a salary and benefits in excess of $1 million a year and had several friends and relatives on the payroll, she claimed nobody told me I couldn't do it. She didn't say I didn't do it. She said nobody told me I couldn't do it. You can go back and Google that one. Richard's got a fire alarm going off in his building. He'll be back. But again, have you trained your professional staff? Have you enforced the rules on them? Do you have performance metrics for people that you're paying? They're different than volunteers. We don't have the same performance metrics for volunteers. We don't have the same criteria or performance metrics for board members or but some stakeholders we do. Have you covered all those? Have you done that work behind the scenes on this? And then we bring all these people together. If we bring them together before we've done the work, it will not go well. I'll just tell you right now. Now, the rest of the story on the United Way is we were enforced. Yeah, we were enforced to give. As principals, we were sent a sheet with, this is how much your school must give. Anything that is short, you will make up with a personal check. And you will write a personal check off the top to be on the superintendent's team. The entree is you will send a check for $1,500 for your personal contribution this year. And your school, whatever is short on what they got to make, is you will write a check for that as well. And then come to find out that the executive director was taking over $1 million a year in salary and benefits. And we were being extorted to actually support that lifestyle. It's no wonder that when I go through the line, well, I haven't recently, but when I would go through the line at the grocery store, would you like to give to the United Way today? No. And don't get me started. You'll have to call the law because I'll be in a rant. I'll just tell you right now, I'll do us both a favor. No, let's move on. I'll give to anything else you got. Veterans, I've got a drawer right here. I counted up recently. I've become too soft-hearted in my old age. You've heard that when you get old, that what you should do is the last check you write should bounce. Well, I'm getting, I'm helping out with all the checks I'm writing, all these different. I intend to die broke, but United Way is not one of them. I don't like the way that they conduct business. But again, that's back to their social constructivism. They partner with organizations in the community and basically hold them hostage. Is we won't give your people money if you don't produce this money and put the big thermometer out in front of your organization's headquarters. Their notion is extortion. It's basically what they do. We will not fund the things that your after school programs or other things that we normally fund unless you meet the metric that we want. And so you've got to be careful about that as well. How do you go about your resource development? But again, you have to agree as a group of stakeholders what you will and won't do. But again, you got to do some education behind that. I like the monthly newsletter. I like collaboration between stakeholders after you've done the work that you need to do. Social constructivism, again, remember, that's about your mission and vision. But again, your vision is your own. The mission is determined by those stakeholders. And make sure, I like satisfaction surveys, but again, 4-point scale instead of a 7. And make sure that you've gone through that IQ score for validity of the survey itself, and then be reliable and be honest and ethical about how you implement it. Don't tell people what you want them to put down on it. Don't give them the answers to the test. That's a reliability issue. Don't do those things. Find what you find. And then the last thing, goal displacement that we've taught. When Richard was talking about, they were about the toys and the materials and that stuff, but their goal was to feed people. But they got distracted by that and let that be a barrier to what they were actually trying to do, was feed hungry people. Goal displacement. Again, the undergraduate education group at Gardner-Webb has goal displacement. They think that the important thing is passing this predictor test, when it's not at all. It's predicting success later. The success later in performance is what we're really interested in. But we've made the test the goal, and we can manipulate that. We have control over that, so we are biasing that by just giving the answer. Here, put this in, put your name on it. 100% pass rate. But again, it's a dual set of books. Excellent job. What time is it? 11 o'clock. It's time for another break, isn't it? Let's take a 10 on this one rather than a 20, and maybe Richard can rejoin us after that. So let's see, what time is the official time here? No, let's come back at 11:15. We'll just make it even numbers here. We'll come back at 11:15 and we'll go to group 2. Excellent job, group 1. Thank you. All right, and we're back. All right, as we come back out of the break, I'm gonna throw you a little curve before we go to group 2 here. The follow-up rant to the first, the rant on social constructivism is, what if it changes? What if the social construct changes? What do you do then? One of the things that we forget about in organizations is that many times things are fluid. As we've learned through COVID, sometimes the social construct changes. And if we can't adapt and keep up with that, and we have to bring our people along with us, they tend to leave the organization if things change and we don't change, and we continue to do business and ignore that the social construct has changed. Hence the Great Resignation. that Ben's working on right now. Social construct of organizations has changed. And the folks who have not adapted to that, they're losing their employees. And again, it goes back to that education piece. When you come in as a consultant or a leader, you've got to educate everybody and then put all the stakeholders together. But what happens if you're in an existing or a continuing leadership role, when the social construct around you changes, if you don't change with it and go back and redo that education, that plan, do, act, study, repeat, rather rinse, repeat, that you learned in one of the previous courses, if you don't do that continuous improvement, you get left behind. And I'll give you a quick example. I was an elementary principal in a rural county in northwestern North Carolina, up in Burke County, when we started performance-based accountability, which eventually became the state ABCs, the report card for schools. The social construct changed. And prior to then, were all your families, your kids safe and didn't have many fights in the building, and was everybody happy in your community? Then all of a sudden, we have a different construct here. Do kids actually learn? We're going to measure whether they learn or not. In 1983, A Nation at Risk came out, a book that said that kids aren't learning anything. In 84, all the state governments came out, and North Carolina included, with a basic education plan, and said every kid gets a basic education. And they patted themselves on the back to the point they dislocated their shoulder, patting themselves on the back. But then some smart guy in the back said, what is a basic education? And they were like, oh crap. And it took 6 years, but they came up with the big thick white notebooks and said, this is the state curriculum, standard course of study. And they sprained the other arm, patting themselves on the back again. And then some other smart guy in the back said, or gal in the back said, how do we know they're getting it? And they said, oh crap. So we started a accountability program in 1989, the first year of the standard course of study was fully implemented. It took 6 years. And then we started an accountability program. And so we didn't, our acronym when we started was PBAP, Performance-Based Accountability Program. Nobody could understand that, and had little dots and all that stuff. And so they said, and so it became the state ABCs. And everybody said, oh, that's a better name on it. But anyway, all of a sudden, principal evaluation changed. What schools were supposed to do changed. The social construct, the agreed upon success changed. But the folks in the central office couldn't keep up with that. And so they were supposed to come out, the instructional assistant superintendent, he was Dr. Richard Jones, Dick Jones at that time, he's supposed to come make 2 visits a year. Well, prior to that, he'd come stay about all day. You go through all this stuff, but then all of a sudden, the construct changed. Why did he need to come and stay all day? I mean, all they're going to do is look at the test scores at the end of the year anyway. And so, when he would show up at my building, he'd say, well, I can't stay but a minute because I'm on my way somewhere else. That became the common theme, is I can't stay but a minute, because he knew he was still required to come out and do that. But that was in the past. We hadn't adapted to the new reality of that's got nothing to do with your effectiveness as a principal now. We've got all these metrics and measures now. The social construct has changed. But he was, the district said, no, he's still got to come out twice. So he'd say, well, I'm on my way somewhere else. And after a couple of years of that, I finally pointed out, Dick, you can't be on the way anywhere else. I'm at the end of the line here. You don't pass us going anywhere. Let me show you a map right quick. And I actually pulled the map up and showed him. I said, it's impossible for you to be going somewhere else. And so here's the map. Let me share my screen. I was at this school right up here. This is Burke County is an anomaly in that this green part up here is serviced by Avery County, because as you can see, the physical national forest starts and it's straight up. You can't get up and down the mountain right here. So I was at the last school right here before the physical forest. Where are you going in our district that you're on the way by coming past me? You can't be going anywhere else. Just admit you're only coming by because the agreed upon construct is that you visit the school twice a year. We both know that it no longer has any bearing whatsoever on performance measures for me or the school. But we're still doing what we used to do because that's what we've always done. But in the end, so, you drove all the way up here And now you're going to turn around after 15 minutes and drive back. We both know that you're not going anywhere else. You couldn't be. I'm not on the way to anywhere. I'm the last school at the end of the line. And that speaks to two things. You've got to change. Your social construct has to change when conditions change, as Ben is finding in his survey. And the other is you got to be honest with it. Back to the cooking again, we had two sets of books. One was, the old one. We're still clinging to this one. But the real one is it's now about performance. We've got state tests that tell us how well you're doing that. We can't rely on that. But we've got to let, part of it is when you come in as a consultant or as you come in with the leader is we got to let loose of the old. If there's a new social construct, we got to do it. And if it changes while we're in leadership or consultancy, we've got to acknowledge that. We fall prey to what I've mentioned before, usual customary practices, what I call UCP. We do it because we've always done it. Dick had always come out twice a year, so he kept on coming out twice a year. That's all he knew to do. Now, rather than staying all day, there was no need for him to stay all day. I can't stay but a minute. I'm on my way somewhere else. And I finally said to him, Dick, I know it can't be true. If you want to come. And I'd love to be the place that you're coming. I want it to be one time when you tell somebody else you can't stay but a minute because you want to go stay with them. Otherwise, I really don't have time for you. He's a very nice man. And if he'd have been a bigger fella, he'd have probably tried to whip me, but he figured discretion was a better part of valor. We both shook hands and parted friends, and I didn't bother to see him again. He left. Stop the perfunctory stuff. Get to the real things. People know when you're disingenuous. They know when you're making stuff up or you're refusing or to acknowledge the new reality. Everybody else knows it. Don't act like people are stupid, that they don't know what's going on. And that's one of the things when we refuse to change and acknowledge the obvious, that seriously limits our effectiveness to lead, is the notion here. So to kind of finish up my rant from the first section is social constructs change. You better be aware of that. All right, we're ready for group 2. Now, Dr. Neal is going to be your minder this morning. She's going to follow along and offer suggestions or critique from your presentation. So group 2, share your screen and let's get started.
Give me 1 second. Y'all see that?
Oh, yes.
Good. All right, cool. All right. Okay, so, oops, I don't know why that's up there. Okay, so let's see here. So I'm Benjamin Novak, and our group made of Leslie Queen, Shuri Som, and Harry Titus. We're going to discuss the case regarding measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. Okay, so the gist of this situation is that the case starts off with like a consultant who basically was brought one of his best friends, who is a member of what's called the CAN, or also known as the Community Action Network, based out of Austin, Texas. And the individual, Mr. Sorensen, who is this director of the CAN network, basically approached the consultant who is the narrator of the case, saying that there's lots of different problems in the nonprofit organizations in the city of Austin. And the biggest thing that we have seen, or what they have seen, is that the funds are limited, and also there's been a lot of disagreements between the sponsors as well as the nonprofit organizations on how we want to have these funds being spent. Right. And so in order to gain more of an understanding on the struggles, the actual between sponsors and the nonprofit organizations, is the consultant spoke with various individuals that are around the Austin area. A couple of those individuals are a professor and researcher named Dr. Lorraine Lewis. And then also he spoke to an individual who was a director of the United Way. And also the other individual was a gentleman by the name of Larry Shell. He was director of the Austin Foundation, but he also was more in that mindset of being the business slash sponsor individual in the case. And then Roderick Buffkin, who was the manager of the local homeless shelter.
Can we get it in presentation mode, Ben?
Is it
please?
not presentation mode?
No. I didn't want to stop you while you're talking.
You're fine, you're fine. I don't know why it's not in presentation mode. I thought it was. I see it on my end.
It's fine. Just click on the third slide and we can just click through that way.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. So as a group, based on our analysis of the case study, we concluded that the central problem for this case was that the Community Action Network is not collecting quantitative and qualitative data to inform stakeholders about effective service delivery. And we believe that based on the fact that they had to bring in, a consultant to go and do via interviews or collecting documents or surveys to really determine sort of the effective service delivery, but also how they were, where they were sort of allocating the funds. And so we knew that in order for them to really make a decision on that, they had to have some qualitative and quantitative data, which they did not have, which is sort of how we concluded that that would be the central problem for this case. If you go to the next one for me, Ben. Thank you, sir. So when thinking about the secondary problem as well, we as a collective agreed that there were sort of two phases to our secondary problem, or two different levels. And the first one being the organizational secondary problem, which resulted in sort of communication and criteria for funding. Each agency is overwhelmingly confusing. So we know that it was very confusing to the nonprofits that reported up to CAN regarding, funding and sort of how funding was allocated. We knew that based on just some of the conversations that the consultant had with various nonprofits. And so we recognize that communication really played a huge portion in that, which caused some true concerns with the different nonprofits. In addition to that, the team as a whole, so various opinions on how the nonprofit organizations should operate and the difficulty of measuring the impact on the people they serve. We knew that some of the folks wanted it to be more business savvy, and then some wanted to really focus on the impact. And they wanted to, when we looked at the homeless shelter, they talked about, well, sometimes we have to spend more time with patients, but we recognize that when we do that, we're not getting the amount of people or the turnaround time. And then we know on the other side, there are some folks that wanted it to be more business minded so they could get, so that they could meet the needs of as many people, but not really focus on the impact. And so we really focus our secondary problems on the organizational piece, but also the team aspect, which resulted in sort of communication, but also the various opinions that many of the nonprofits shared.
So when our group thought about possible solutions, we thought about what would help the organization achieve the best outcomes. And so we considered the tasks that they had ahead of them, the funding sources that they needed to impress in order to receive funding, and then also the relational the relation that they wanted to have with other people in terms of being able to communicate with them and being able to share their thoughts and ideas. And so ultimately what we thought about was that in order for us to achieve the best possible outcomes, we needed to consider the people, the process, and the product. And that certainly does marry with us identifying what the central problem of this organization was. And so when we talked about possible solutions, we thought it was very important that the mission, vision, and value statement be defined, because basically the mission is the calling card for, agencies. And if they are not aware of what the calling card is or what their mission is, there would certainly be certain levels of confusion in terms of how to achieve the outcome, and certainly how to press upon stakeholders and funding sources about what their needs are. And so when we talked about looking at the vision, that describes where the organization wants to go and what it would look like if they achieve their mission. One of the things that they talked about within the case study was that the mission, is married intimately with each organization. And although that organization may have a lofty mission in terms of, for example, eradicate racism, if they don't eradicate racism, does it mean that all of their efforts are not able to make an impact on the people and the communities that they're serving? And so certainly very important to understand the values, which are the principles that kind of guide their behavior. And so when we talked about outlining and actually executing possible solutions, we identified having a strategic plan. And the purpose of having a strategic plan was to kind of set overall goals, and then develop a plan to achieve them. And so in doing so, we felt it was important that there be some analysis that occurred, whether it be SWOT, understanding, the strengths of the organization, the weaknesses, opportunities, or threats, so that when we create the plan, that, like Colin said, we want to have the right people on the bus, hedgehog, we want to be able to do what we do best. And so in developing the strategic plan, certainly wanting to identify KPIs, so that, or key performance indicators, so that we would be able to establish a baseline, as well as determine benchmarks, so that we could establish if there was progress or lack of progress. And aside from that, having this information within the strategic plan would hopefully give us a competitive edge, because collectively, CAN had a number of nonprofit organizations, but those people that could persuade the funding sources that they were doing the most effective work would probably get the money. And so as a consequence, it's real important that we focus on the strategic plan and understanding what the competitive edge would be in order to achieve that. And with any plan, certainly looking at having a set schedule for evaluation, because we always want to be able to determine what's working and what is not working. Okay. And so, as we talked about earlier on, Harry had indicated that communication was a big indicator, or a thing that we certainly needed to address. Our consultant group identified that having a communication plan was essential for this to, be effective, because one of the things that the communication plan would do would show mutual purpose within the organization, but also we wanted to be able to create conditions where people felt safe to share their thoughts and ideas, and basically creating psychological safety. And so with the communication plan, we wanted to be able to make sure that there was a clear understanding of who needs to be aware of what information, how and how often that information would be disseminated, and who would be responsible for sharing that information. One of the things that we talked about was, having a FAQ, or frequently asked questions, so that everybody could be aware, and there would be some standard things that could be certainly addressed. And, the traditional things of, perhaps emails, newsletters, certainly keeping others and everyone aware of blogs, because communication is not just internal, it's also external. So making sure that the things that we were sharing was understood by all of those that would be touched by what was being done. When we talked about a communication plan, you know, we talked about tools, certainly of training. And one of the things that our group talked about was the book Crucial Conversations, knowing that, you know, not often about what we say, but how we say and delivery being important. You know, in the book Crucial Conversations, the authors talk about understanding that within communication, you know, there's high stakes, there's going to be opposing opinions, and certainly there's going to be strong emotion, because again, we're talking about nonprofits being passionate about what their mission is and knowing that it marries with, you know, being the driver for what they want to do and how they want to go about doing it. And so also along with, you know, training related to communication, also including things like negotiation and active listening skills. But the overall function of the communication plan was certainly to make sure that we got everybody on the same page in terms of what we would be doing and how we would be going about achieving it. So as we identified in our central problem about the collection of qualitative and quantitative data being, you know, really essential, you know, we thought about different ways of doing that, certainly with, you know, surveys, interviews, observations, and perhaps, you know, even creating like an affinity group where we would have a place where people would come together, share thoughts and ideas, and could all bring it to the table so that we were aware and could always check the culture and the temperature climate of what was happening amongst you know, all of the organizations, to make sure that we would be focused on, you know, are we achieving being effective and making sure that everybody is on the same page. And when we talked about the quantitative data, just certainly looking at, you know, maybe close the multiple choice questions, but for us also marrying with our communication plan, we thought to certainly have scheduled board meetings where we could get together and have certainly identified ways of how the meetings would be conducted, but certainly on a quarterly basis so that people could hear the same things, be aware of what was happening, and be able to have input, because collaboration is key in being able to create positive solutions.
Thanks, Sharice. So if we take all of those possible solutions, you know, that's a lot of things to consider. And our plan for implementation is really where we're saying, what should we do first? What should we do second? Kind of a list of steps to go through. So in our mind, for the CAN agency, we feel like they need to define their mission, their vision, their values, almost for each of the agencies. They could have one overarching for all of CAN, but really each one needs to decide what's important to them, where do they see their organization going, what is important and what's valuable to them. So we feel like that needs to be done first. Then the second thing is they need to each develop their strategic plan using SMART goals, developing outcomes. You know, this is what we think is important. This is how we're going to measure it. This is our target. You know, this is our assessment results, and then working for continuous improvement of how can we get better. And then even if they are meeting those SMART goals, there's always things you can do to improve. For example, in my current position, we're getting back surveys right now, and people will say, you know, I met the goal, check, I'm done. But really, we're trying to encourage them to think ahead. Well, what can you change? What can you do different? What can you add? So that might be an example of them setting their goals and working toward making things better constantly. We thought the third thing they need to do is develop their communication plan. And we use the word tailored a lot in our plan for implementation because we feel like it can be tailored toward the agency toward each agency. So some might feel that one means of communication works better, or more frequent communication, or like Dr. Lamb talked about, the small groups ahead of time before you get to the large groups. All of those things could be built into the communication plan. Number 4, we feel like they need to hold regular board meetings for each agency and tailor that to best meet their needs, whether that be Zoom, in person, email conversations, whatever works best. And then number 5 and 6 both go hand in hand, because we feel like to truly implement and to kind of get a true picture, they need both pieces of data. They need the qualitative and they need the quantitative. And that could look different for each agency, or it could be highlighted different in each agency, in that if you know the homeless shelter is going to focus on that qualitative piece, then bring in those folks to share testimonials, or bring in those people that have truly been impacted by the service. But if you're looking at the United Way, for instance, who's looking for that quantitative piece, then really kind of focus on that with them. You're always sharing all the pieces of data, but the focus may be different. So we really feel like being able to kind of put this plan together and have all those different pieces is going to help the CAN to be more successful and evaluate their effectiveness. So in summary, or kind of to conclude, we really feel like the consultant needs to share with them that there needs to be a consistent process. They need identified outcomes, both qualitative and quantitative, that marry with their initiatives in each group. A timeline is important; it needs to be established, and then scheduled reports need to be offered as to whether or not we are meeting those outcomes. Each board should look at their data preferences and have data preferences and share those with their respective board members and their funders to see if we're making progress or if we are meeting our outcomes. And then our reference is to our HIT textbook, where we looked at a communication plan and how to go about creating one of those.
Excellent job. These are very thorough presentations, Dr. Lamb. I'm quite impressed with this group.
Yes, I am too.
That is fantastic. I really liked how you clearly laid out a plan. I think that many organizations miss the mark on identifying what their mission and vision, what those are, and clearly making sure that everybody knows and understands what that is, so that everybody's operating on the same page and developing that strategic plan. But you can also use that data, gathering that quantitative and qualitative, to help develop those strategic plans. Because sometimes organizations will, especially schools, will just come up with things they think are important or in need, instead of using data to drive it. So using that, not developing the strategic plan and then gathering that data, but doing it in concert with the other would definitely be beneficial. But I think you guys did an awesome job of organizing a way for them to improve their outcomes and following a step-by-step process. And that communication piece, I think, is critical to ensuring that, again, everybody is operating on the same page and not doing their own island, living on their own island and operating on their separate organizations, but if everybody's working under it with each other. I think that's an awesome job.
I do too.
One thing that struck me is, and I liked how you kept using the word tailored or customized or based on preferences. However, in big organizations and complex organizations such as CAN, in this case study, customization sometimes comes at the expense of efficiency and effectiveness. And you have to have some standardization to the process as well. Any thoughts about how you balance customization and standardization and where you find that sweet spot in the continuum?
Somebody from that group?
I think one thing you have to continue to do is listen to the frontline workers and the stakeholders within the organization to really figure out, and sort of what Dr. Lamb shared with the last group. Things change, and as an organization, you have to be willing to change as things move forward, and new people come in, or new policies are created, or a global pandemic happens, right? Like you have to be willing to sort of shift with the time. And so I think one of the things we can do to sort of find that happy medium is continue to listen and move with the data. And so whether that's a 6-month surveys or check-ins with the folks within the organization to really feel like, we know for the last 6 months this has worked, but let's do another check-in to make sure we're still moving in the right direction. And if we're not, let's take a pause and really work to revise what we're doing.
Excellent.
Continuous improvement.
Exactly. I wrote that down. In a manufacturing environment, we call that 6 Sigma. Those fidelity checks where we check in to make sure things are going, and we get a continuous feedback loop. In our line, in organizations that aren't a manufacturing environment, we call that formative assessment or fidelity checks. We have to do that on a regular, we need that constant feedback loop for continuous improvement. We need to have that. As Harry said, we keep informing, because there is there's an amount of inefficiency here if we don't have a standardized, and even if we standardize, if things change. And so we have to marry those two. And so I wrote that down myself, but yes, if we're going to maintain that, I heard the term competitive edge. If we're going to maintain that competitive edge, we've got to have a continuous feedback loop. And that's part of it. And I want to get to one more point, but I want to speak to strategic planning. Organizations do strategic plans. The timing of when we do them is more important than the plan itself. That's probably the dumbest thing I'm going to say today. I say a lot of dumb things. That's probably the dumbest one. But listen what I'm saying here. When you do it is more important than what you did. If you do it a priori up front, if you do it before all these critical conversations, crucial conversations, before the data collection, if you set about writing a plan, you don't know your numbers, it won't be a plan. It'll just be hope. Your strategic plan comes at the end, not at the beginning. We need to hear from all these stakeholders. We need to have a common language. We need to have our operational definitions. We need to have our mission, vision, square. After all of that stuff, then we can go about writing our plan. But unfortunately, 90-something% of all organizations start from a strategic plan. I'm a member of an organization that recently, the leader of the organization said, I wrote this over the weekend, here we go. I was like, what? I can believe you wrote it over the weekend. I'm not making this up. Said, I wrote this plan for y'all over the weekend. Did you get any input from anybody? No. Did you use that? Nope. This is, I wrote this over the weekend. Look at me. Well, I don't know much, but I can guarantee this won't work. You've let 2 cats out of the bag here. One that you don't know anything, and that we won't know anything either. You've guaranteed that we're going to be unsuccessful in this. So kudos to you on that one. We a couple of things are certain, but all these things have to factor into that strategic plan. And then my last rant on this one again is back to the book, Crucial Conversations. I think the world has changed on conversations as well. And let me share what I think. The common wisdom for much of my adult lifetime has been the sandwich approach. the critical or crucial conversations. Who knows what the sandwich approach is?
Is it the same thing in counseling where we say something positive initially, then we put the meat in between in terms of what we're really trying to address, and then we give a pat on the back at the end, closing it, you know, making sure that we say something positive so that the thing that we really focused on in the middle is not so, I guess, tough to swallow?
Yeah, that's the sandwich. That's the sandwich approach to critical or crucial conversations. Most of my adult working life, that has been the notion that that's how you held crucial or critical conversations. That we come in and we say something positive. Here's all the good things that you do, and then kind of sotto voce, you know, you really suck at this. But then in the end, you know, you're really good at this. And what happens is we bury the lead. We don't, you know, and it does soften the blow, but it also it distorts the message. We told you that all these things that don't matter, you're really good at. The thing that we really need for you to be good at, you're no good at that. But then here's some stuff at the end. We can't bury the lead in organizations as the leader or as the consultant. We can't bury the lead. You know, I'm always, I get up in the mornings and I read and try to learn something every day because I don't know much. So I try to learn something every day, and you learn from different media. And I saw something recently, was a video clip of what we're talking about. And they said, we're trying to convince a person to do a thing. And they went through all of these pieces, and then the critical piece, and in the end, and the response was, well, you should have led with that you're going to actually pay me to do this. You should have led with that piece. That was the critical piece of information in this. You should have led with that. You would have gotten my attention. Now I don't really know what you said, so let's go back and start again. And that's what happens is we think we're having critical conversation, and we think that people knew the takeaway from what we were doing. Many times they don't, because we hit it or we sandwiched it in order to try to soften the blow or the impact, and we didn't actually have a critical conversation at all about what was important. So you don't have to be as, you know, I'm an iron fist. I'm not even in a velvet glove. I fully acknowledge that. You don't have to be as blunt as I am. Do as I say, not as I do. But you must have critical conversations that are actually critical conversations, where you talk about what the problem is, or what needs, where we're missing the boat. We can't talk around it. We can't sit and spend 90% of our time trying to find good things to say about people or to people that hides their actual message. When I first started teaching school, they had just closed the local boarding and reformatory school. It's called Alexander School Systems. They closed it. It had been a boarding school, and they sent those young people to the local high school. And you talking about a rough bunch. They were a rough bunch. And the good thing about it was there weren't many of them there on Friday, because they were all on work release or had to go to drunk driving school or whatever. I mean, this was a tough bunch. And we had I'm so old that we still taught Bible in public high school when I first started teaching school. And Miss Ari Smith taught Bible at the high school. And Miss Smith was the kindest, most wonderful lady in the history of the world. She must have been 80 years old. And what she would say, if she couldn't find anything else to say good about this bunch of criminals, she'd say, oh, but he's got pretty eyes. And so that became metaphor in our high school, that, whatever this particular turd had done that day, but he's got pretty eyes. But we can't fall into that trap. We want to find the good in everything and everybody, but we don't deliver the critical conversations, the crucial conversations that we need to as leaders and consultants, because we're too busy trying to do the sandwich. We're too busy trying to highlight, accentuate the positive, that we can't ever actually have critical conversations about where we are. You don't have to be as blunt and as coarse as I am sometimes, but you got to find a way to share that information and that data. That's what they're paying you for. They're not paying you to be a cheerleader. They're paying you to inspire and motivate others, but you got to know your numbers. You got to be realistic, and you got to have critical conversations. This is going well, or the only thing could have been worse is we'd have burnt the building down and did what you did. We have to have those conversations with people. We have to let them know where we are, and we have to have data to back that up. And that gets us into my last piece that I wrote down: qualitative and quantitative. For whatever reason, we have this notion that it's societal. It's not just organization. It's societal. That qualitative data doesn't count as much as quantitative. We can't put a number on it. It's not as strong, or the efficacy is in question. Qualitative data is just as strong and just as variable as quantitative. And so we have to understand that talking to people, doing interviews, observations, gathering qualitative data is just as valuable as quantitative data. We have to make sure that we don't disparage that part of data collection. That it's important, as this last group, excellent job, pointed out. We must have qualitative and quantitative, and we can't discount the qualitative. Excellent job. Dr. Burgess is on deck now. She's going to wear you out after the next one. So we're ready for group 3 now.
All right, I'll share my screen. All right, crew, are we ready?
We're ready.
All right, can everybody hear us and see the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
All righty.
We're good to go.
Okay, case study 1, measuring organization effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. And our team consists of myself, Chiffon, Angelique, Birdie, and Pastor Joe. Okay. People, places, and background information. These are key people that was important in the case study. The consultant, the organization, effectiveness to present to funders. Luke Saracen, he was the director of the Community Action Network, Canaan, the nonprofit community, in the nonprofit community. Dr. Lori Lewis, she was a professor in Communication Studies Department at the University of Texas. Lucinda Beckett, she's a director at the local United Way chapter. Larry Shell, director of the Austin Foundation, which is a large private foundation. And Roderick Buskin, he runs the downtown homeless shelter. Okay, we're going to talk about the biggest challenges and processes and outcome of the metrics. And these are what we as a team came up with. Number one of the challenges were the economic downturn due to unemployment, budget cuts, and decreased revenues in the nonprofit community. And as we all know, missions is very important. Missions is the heart of a nonprofit organization. But the challenge is it's hard to measure. Thirdly, communication is key to both the stakeholders and the funders. Fourth, nonprofit organizations need to be able to demonstrate quality work, which deal with effectiveness. Last but not least, in order to keep the services afloat, you got to have funding, you got to have finances and resources that are needed to keep the organization going.
And so our central problem that we came up with was there was a lack of clear communication inside the organization and externally with the nonprofit. And that was showing it impacted the organization negatively. It impacted how it's being funded and operated. And a secondary problem was creating alternative and comprehensive measurements of effectiveness to address. So being like with budget cuts and our resources, because less money means less goods and services that are available to the clients, which hurts our mission.
The case study learning objectives were to help you understand the complicated issue of measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. The second learning objective was to recognize the tensions in the nonprofit sector between business-like approaches to organization development and more holistic approaches to service provision. And the third learning objective was to learn more about the role of communication and the social construction of the organizational effectiveness. So our 5 recommendations are, the first one is to develop a clear and concise mission statement that communicates well with all, that's communicated well with all stakeholders. And we noticed that this correlated with the learning objectives 1 and 3. Our second recommendation would have been to review and analyze growth data and the results of the client satisfaction surveys. This would correlate with learning objective number 1. The third recommendation would be to analyze how resources are already being utilized and review how resources could potentially be redistributed so that they could be used more effectively. And this correlated with learning objective number 2. The fourth recommendation was to incorporate unified performance expectations and track who all is being impacted by the organization so that the data can be monitored and assessed for a more business-like approach. So this would appeal to the more business-like people versus the nonprofit sector who looks more at qualitative data. So we thought this would help them even out the playing field and kind of have the best of both worlds. And this correlated with learning objective number 2. The fifth recommendation was to create a monthly newsletter or some type of social media site where updates and successes and even needs for supports could be shared with anyone, even on a global kind of perspective, and this would correlate with learning objective number 3.
Okay, the next one we talked about was social construction of organizational effectiveness. The theory is that its sociological knowledge examines how individuals or organizations develop their understanding, in this case, organizational effectiveness in a for-profit versus nonprofit. Differing perspectives of how to measure effectiveness can be understood and accepted. The measurement can change with new knowledge and interaction with any society. An example is the temperance movement of alcoholism. Someone who drank a lot would go to prison, versus now it's more looked at as a disease and addiction for medical and psychological assistance. Another explanation is organizational effectiveness is an achievement for organizational agents and stakeholders convincing each other that an organization is pursuing the right objectives in the correct way. Herman and Renz had an example of the baseball umpires. This one's for Birdie. One was calls balls and strikes as they are. The second one is I call them as I see them. The third one, they ain't nothing till I call them. They're saying the same thing, just differently. This is where communication is key in any relationship, in this case with the NPOs and the for-profit. Another example was why NPOs shouldn't think like a business model, because it would mean the lack of moral basis for action and more monetary motivation equaling reward. Going from what's right to doing what pays, most advocates would say doing what's right means doing well and trying to ensure continuing to do it well and being rewarded later. Volunteering means no monetary reward, but qualitative measurements of possible progression and results. Next slide, please. Our preferred solution was to develop better communication, clear and concise mission statement, monthly newsletters showing progression in areas that need improvement, donation reminders, open forum, board meetings, visitations, annual progress reports showing new improvements and suggestions.
For the action plan, we stated that we thought they should adopt and revise the following policies and procedures. First, their mission and maybe even the vision. We thought this was a big component of them first even getting people who support what they stand for and getting their feet off the ground. We never saw their mission actually outlined in the case study, so we thought this was something that needed to be brought to attention. We thought they could create unified goals, outline responsibilities and expectations for stakeholders within the CANS organization. We thought they should look into their finances and take a deeper dive into that. They should include collaborative efforts with various stakeholders, whether that be in the form of hosting open forum, board meetings where they can share information and updates and needs, or even visitations where they invite external stakeholders or even potential donors to come in and kind of see the organization, see how it operates, see how they could even volunteer their time. Maybe it's not even something where they're giving financially, but maybe they could just give of their time and help in certain areas of need. So we thought that would be another way to look at it. Potentially creating a hub schedule. Since this is an overall CANS organization, that means that there's a bunch of smaller nonprofit organizations that make up this collaborative CANS organization. So maybe they could create a schedule where they all come in together to meet. Maybe they meet individually with the smaller organizations, or maybe there's a schedule where they could allow everyone to visit, or kind of have some type of thing where there's a showcase event where all the organizations could be highlighted so that they see this is where your funding goes to the CANS organizations, this is how it goes filtered out and what it goes to. We thought that might be a nice thing to implement. And then lastly, we said the monthly updates, of course, which could be some type of newsletter or social media page, maybe even something where they're sending out an email thread or chain, just kind of giving updates on what's going on, the needs and successes that they're experiencing. Here's our action plan timeline. So all of those things that we just listed, we put over here in the specific activity column. We created a timeline and we stated, as of the year that we're in currently, when it should be implemented and how it should continue forward. We stated the people responsible and the resources needed, the types of assessments that they would use, whether formative or summative, to kind of just progress monitor where they're at, where they need to go, and kind of see if strategies are working or not. We indicated the goals for each specific activity and the indicators of success that they would look for to see, are we actually meeting these goals? Is it helping us progress forward, or do we need to reevaluate all of these things and come up with better strategies?
And so we also, we also looked at how and why would funders give money to nonprofits. So we give our money to nonprofit organizations to help others. That's a personal reason. And then we give our money to make our communities a better place. And that could be a personal or social reason. We give because of spiritual beliefs, serving others, which is a personal reason. And then donors and funders give because they believe in the organizational mission, which is, or could be, a professional reason.
And then these are our references. And that concludes our presentation.
All right. Great work. That was a lot of information. And I liked, as I was writing questions, oftentimes your next slide answered the question that I was writing. And when you gave your recommendations, there was a lot of them, and it was hard for me to put it into a timeline or get priorities around it. And then your next slide was the timeline and who was responsible and who was involved. So I liked the progression of everything. I wanted to know, especially since you led and the case study talked about the importance of communication, and your evaluation and data collection focused a lot around quantitative data, the surveys and reviewing growth data. But I want to consider the importance of that qualitative data and being able to tell your organization's story. Because on that last slide before the references, you listed the reasons people donate. And none of those were closely connected to quantitative data. You don't donate because of the results of a survey. Now, those are important to consider for internal to your organization, but communicating externally, a lot of times people will reach into their pockets and take out their checkbooks because of a story of success that the organization told, how their clients were served, how the community was improved. And coming up with a communication plan and a sustainable timeline and places for telling those stories is so important. Another thing I really liked was how all three of the case study presentations today started with a mission statement, especially in an organization like CAN that is currently struggling with their identity, in that they want to be a purpose-driven organization, but are feeling this tug to act more business-like in evaluating their effectiveness. By clearly grounding any evaluation in that mission statement, in the vision, you can get more traction to your work, and making sure that the quantitative data you collect can be directly connected to the mission and vision is going to be meaningful, because then your improvement will be around that. You won't be trying to improve in areas that aren't in your core business, because that's when it starts to feel too business-like and too compliance-driven, and not enough of the core values of what nonprofits are really about. And I wanted to ask an example in the case study. I can't remember which character in the case study gave the analogy, but she talked about when you have a balls on a desk and you roll one and it hits one ball, but then all the other balls on the desk move. So while the first ball didn't directly touch the last ball in the chain, it had a impact on it. And the way you arrange those balls on the desk can make that impact more or less. So how do you, within an organization, as a consultant, make recommendations for improving systems so that it's organized as efficiently as possible, so the first ball can have the most possible impact on that last thing it has an impact on? I don't know if I did a good job of explaining that. They did it better in the article. But how did you think about that as related to your presentation? Do you remember that that analogy in the article, the case study? How did that impact your presentation? What was the content of your presentation?
Actually, no, I don't remember it, but I guess where I'm looking at, because I did the social construction, where I was looking at it was you have to figure out what your goals are and aim towards the end goal, which would be the last ball in the thing. That's where I think you have to understand each one of the nonprofits to see what they need, and then compile the support system, finances, resources. Because like the gentleman who did the homeless shelter may not need, he may need finances, but I'm saying he may need more resources. They may need more blankets. They may need more food, even tents. Where you have a larger organization like a big food bank, they need more funding to get the food to get out to the people. You need to know where everybody's going in order to have that impact.
Absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. It's that alignment and knowing what everybody needs and making sure your efforts and resources are aligned with the outcomes. Good job.
Thank you.
That's a
Excellent.
question. When you were talking about the ball, so is there a way for us to kind of quantify like impact or do forecasting? Like, even though when she was using that example, she was saying that, you know, the one ball will, you know, cause the last ball to move. So is there a way that we can, you know, using data or some type of statistical tool to kind of either measure the, like the forecasting or maybe perceived impact?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we're actually, Dr. Neal and I are teaching another class, and we just had a long discussion about this, is in social science, in nonprofits, in education, it is difficult to have that kind of experimental research results where you say that this variable has this exact outcome every time. You know, they do that in medicine because they can have scientific studies and treatment and control groups, but we can't do that in the nonprofit or education sector very often because there's lots of ethical issues to be considered, and there's lots of variables out of our control when it comes to homelessness or faith-based organizations or education. So it's really difficult to draw those linear connections. But what we can draw conclusions about are the relationships between things. We can say that when more money is invested in this specific area, oftentimes you get these outcomes. And we can support that through the quantitative data that you mentioned, qualitative stories and examples, and research. If you can get those three things saying, all agreeing that yes, these two factors are connected, then you can talk about the relationship between those things. But it's very difficult, Charisse, to get that kind of definitive answer about what works and what doesn't in the social sciences sector.
Yeah, it is. Now, what we attempt to do is a regression analysis. So the part of the question is what statistical methodology do we use to try to do these things? Is a regression analysis where we've done an analysis of variance and we know what percentage of variance that each of these individual variances attribute to the dependent variable, what we're trying to affect in the end. That's a regression analysis. But again, it's hard to know what percentage in social sciences of the variance in the outcome is attributed to this particular variable, this independent variable, how much it has on the dependent variable. It's not an exact science. That's why we do regression analysis. We have large numbers, repeated measures. That's what supercrunching, the book Supercrunching, is about. We continually collect this data, and regression analysis predicts if we put these variables together, we'll get this outcome. But it's not exact. The actual regression equation is exact, but the amount of variance that each one of those particular variances contribute, of those dependent contribute to that independent, independent variables contribute to that dependent at the end, is ever changing. It's an algorithm that changes all the time. And that's why we constantly gather data, constantly, because that algorithm does not stay the same yesterday as it was the day before or will be tomorrow. And then you have other inputs like COVID, supply chain issues, those kinds of things, those unintended consequences. Now, do we have anybody in the group that spent any significant time in the military? One of the things that the military does is they attach military. I know, don't say something ugly like it's an oxymoron. They attach military intelligence units to most divisions, and what those people do is they work on the law of unintended consequences. What are those connections? If we put an input here, what we get the most impact, but what are the negative things that might come if we do that as well? In businesses, we call that person, excuse me, I have a problem pronouncing this word, ombudsman. That's what they're called in businesses. And basically, and in some companies, it's called risk assessors. But what they try to predict is those connections. If X, then Y. If we put this in, what will it affect? What are those linear connections that we know if we put an input here, what will it impact over there, either positively or negatively? So in military, it's the military, that's what military intelligence does. That's their entire job, is try to predict if we do this, what will happen. And in business, we have ombudsmen, or we have risk assessment divisions that try to tell us what those relationships are and what those inputs will be. It's not an exact science. A lot of it is prediction. It's trying to predict what will happen, and predict is always, there's variation in that prediction. But yes, that's what you will use. That's a great question. But again, it's experience. It's the combination of experience and quantitative and qualitative. It's putting all those together. That's why leadership is hard, because it's not exacting. We can't just. It's not a formula. It's not thermodynamics where energy is neither lost nor gained. We get out of it what we put in. It's not the way it works in the real life. And so we have to understand that. Now, last point I wanted to make on this one. When Bertie was talking about doing showcase events, I think those are wonderful. That's a great idea. But you got to know your numbers and you got to know your story. I had an old professor at NC State in graduate school there a long time ago. His name was C. Douglas Bryant. And he summarized that, but what he said was, don't try to get on center stage until you've got a center stage act, until you know your numbers, until you know your story. One of the things that we do to damage our organizations is we invite people in to see what we do, and we don't know what we do. We can't tell our story, or we can't tell our numbers. And that's more harmful than it is beneficial. So it's kind of like, as back to the strategic plan, that comes at the end of all the work that you have to do, not at the beginning. The showcase, that inviting people in, yes, we need to do that, but we need to know our numbers and know our story. And stories are important to tell. Those qualitative stories, because as was pointed out, people don't cut loose of those checks over numbers. You got to pull the emotional piece. I mean, I told you we have to run to the TV in our house every time that that commercial comes on where Sarah McLachlan sings "In the Arms of the Angels," trying to get you to give to save these dogs. Back to the old National Lampoon magazine from 40 years ago. They had a picture on the cover: "Buy this magazine or we'll shoot this dog." That was the cover of the magazine. I can't make that up. You can Google it. But we try, to get people to write checks, there has to be a story. There has to be, that's why I said you cannot discount qualitative, because that sometimes is more powerful than the quantitative. We tend to discount qualitative. Qualitative is the story. You got to have the story.
Now, with the story, I've had places where I had to go and do like a devotional and for the homeless. And since I was homeless at one time, I have a positive outcome and I can show them the benefits.
The story.
Then
that's exactly. That's exactly it. We've got to tell the story. And that comes from our qualitative.
Yes, sir.
That's great. Thank you, Joe. That testimony, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Mhm.
When you do those showcases, you got to tell that story.
I think an important piece of that they've all talked about, that all connects to their communication plan as well, is how are you telling that story and making sure that everybody knows and understands it.
Yes.
And progressing. I think that's what the thing with the goal was. How is it progressing too?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. Does anybody need to take a 5-minute, or we need to push on and do our last one, and we'll be done when we get our last one done. The group 4, now group 4 knows that y'all get to go first next time. We'll reverse the order. And so group 4, thank you for being patient today. Let's push on. Group 4, share your screen and let's finish this thing up.
All right, group 4 life. About to share my screen. Let me know if you can see.
Yes, we've got it.
Measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. Our group members are our fearless leader, Talia Dalton, Sean Perry, Reed Rollins, and myself, Beverly Ruffey. Next slide, please. The background and setting are important to help understand this entire case study and the situation that has been taking place in Austin, Texas. Community Action Network, or CAN, as we will refer to it, is a large collaboration of nonprofit organizations and government agencies that work on social services and community development in Austin, Texas. Many changes were happening and taking place in the nonprofit community in response to the economic downturn. There was more demand on the system because of unemployment, but less money and less services because of budget cuts and decreased tax revenues. There was more pressure from stakeholders and funding agencies for nonprofits to measure and demonstrate the effectiveness of their organizations. Key individuals of this case study are Luke Sorensen, the director of CAN. He brought in an external consultant who happens to be an old friend, and he agreed to offer consulting services to CAN after learning about their need for organizational expertise. The consultant met with various members of CAN's partner organizations, representatives from funding agencies, and others supporting the nonprofit community. Other important individuals were Dr. Lori Lewis. She's a communications professor at the University of Texas and an expert in organizational communication with an emphasis on the nonprofit sector. Lucinda Beckett is director of the local United Way chapter, and she's a member of CAN's executive team. Larry Schill is director of the Austin Foundation, which is a large private foundation that supports many of the social service and community development initiatives in the Austin area. And Roderick Buffkin, who runs a big homeless shelter in downtown Austin. Next slide, please.
Learning objectives. For the first learning objective, to help understand the organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector, we learned that along with operations management and financial accounts, nonprofits must be able to measure and prove the overall impact that their services have on someone else's life. For the second learning objective, to recognize the tensions in the nonprofit sectors, we realize that if nonprofits don't move towards a more business-like model, which CAN is kind of hesitant to do, to better financially be responsible and make good use of their resources, then they won't be able to receive the money they need from their funders. And in turn, they will not be able to help the people that are in need, which is the whole objective of the organization. The third and last learning objective, to learn more about the role of communications and organizational effectiveness, means that organizational effectiveness is not just an objective, but an understanding and a relationship that is created through multiple interactions with the stakeholders. Central problem. We believe that the lack of communication between CAN, the stakeholders, and the community is the main central problem. The challenge is being able to successfully communicate how effectiveness is measured in the nonprofit world when monetary value is not the primary goal. So trying to understand that the concept of organizational effectiveness is socially constructed, and that when it comes to the nonprofit sector, there is not a specific strategy, like one specific strategy under which effectiveness is measured. The difference in value between for-profit and not-for-profit organizations states that the difficulty for this CAN organization is to quantify successful strategies based on specific factors. CAN must have constant communication with their funders and stakeholders about the quality and about their contributions in order to establish and maintain positive perceptions. They have to be able to explain their processes that is needed in order to influence any important outcomes, and then also show how that work is facilitating and supporting that process. Our secondary problems include competition for funding, because there is more of a demand on the system due to unemployment. So there's less money and services available because of budget cuts and decreased tax revenues. Educating the stakeholders is our secondary problem. There's because there's more pressure from the funders and the private foundations and getting government grants for nonprofits to be able to measure and demonstrate organizational effectiveness. The third one, as Beverly stated earlier, the economic downturn has caused changes within the community. The fourth one, measuring organizational effectiveness. In order to have nonprofit effectiveness, it is a matter of evaluation and should use as many different criteria to measure their effectiveness. It's connected to the use of the accurate organizational practices such as strategic planning and financial forecasting, but there's not only just one commonly used applicable best practice that's suitable for all nonprofits. And the last one, partnerships with like minds, being able to find partners who have that same passion and who believe in CAN's mission statements. They trust that they're going to do good, important work around the community, and they will want to continue with that relationship in the future.
All right, thank you, Talia. Thank you, Bev. Both good jobs. Key issues, goals, and problems. Community Action Network, CAN, again, is a collaboration of nonprofit organizations and government agencies centered on social services and community development in Austin. Group 4 worked together to analyze the case about Community Action Network. And as a group, we found solutions and will provide an action plan to Luke Sorensen as director of CAN. CAN in this case study is working through challenges that center on external dynamics, reduced funding, increased requests for services, and pressure from funding sources to measure and demonstrate the effectiveness of CAN. CAN has recognized recent tensions in the nonprofit funding sector between business-like approaches to show that they're meeting the needs of the stakeholders and a more holistic approach of the service provision sector. The balance between the heart and the mind is the very visceral point, and as the tensions grow, who are solely guided by the mission, which are the quals, versus the business-like approaches that are taken into consideration of the performance, which are the quants. So working through this dynamic of quals, vice versa quants, communication is the key, especially when we begin to elaborate on data analysis and service impacts. The varied forms of communication approaches are the factors that help maintain the homeostasis between the holistic approach and the business aspects of the organization. Some of the goals we wanted to help CAN with dealt with communication, with a communication audit, possible website to help with organizational responsiveness, public reports that detail financials and service provider numbers, social media platforms, and communication through the arts. Personnel development, and strategic alignment with the partners will also help with future funding and their funding sources. Next slide, please. All right, for the people, by the people. Individuals and funding sources want to be able to peer beyond the walls of an organization to see the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and how things are done. Through quantitative and qualitative data analysis, CAN must manage their message and control the outward perceptions of their organization. Group 4 feels this is truly the crux of their dilemma. The way CAN accomplishes this goal is through financial reports, interviews, surveys, comparisons, census data, and artistic expressions. The suggested direction for this data analysis for CAN is to do the following: surveys, quantitatively look at the survey data where service numbers served are detailed in a comparison format to money spent. Furthermore, they must also analyze quantitatively by specifically looking at the modes of the survey answers from beneficial parties served through partner vendors. A correlation is suggested between money spent and number of services received over a 3-year period to show trends and relationships. CAN will need to dig further into their financial data and view it through the lenses of descriptive statistics on usages over the 3 years, then comparatively look at other agencies of like sizes in other cities. Community interviews and consumer-based interviews by CAN must look at answers and then analyze them qualitatively based on what is said, the value that's added, and the community and how it's improving. Financial forecasting is something further that should solidify some funding sources through their strategic planning. The artistic perspective of this quantitative analysis by CAN will show through plays, poems, paintings, social media that funding sources for CAN are making a difference and the needs of CAN stakeholders are also being met. Visually seeing people's lives get better with statistically backed data digs beyond our perceptions, details, compares, and defines just how significant CAN's achievements really are. In short, basically knowing our audience and making sure our information is tailored to their needs. Thank you.
And here we have our alternative solutions. A good alternative solution would be to contract an external research and marketing company to establish baseline data and build CAN's reputation, as well as expand the network's reach through social media and also other public events. A bland solution would be town hall meetings that meet quarterly, which would increase the communication periodically, but would not have any large or long-lasting impact on services. A mixed alternative solution would be to employ a third-party advisory board for CAN, which could positively impact services and actions, but would not improve communication, which is our primary central problem. Obviously, a poor solution would be to do nothing. As we've talked before, not making a decision is a decision in itself, and we continue dealing with the impact from the economic downturn and all the competition for funding. And so the problem would just continue to get worse. And then uncertain would be a web-based software where providers would be able to enter their service, the services they provide, and allow stakeholders to seek funding through that as well. Next slide, please. And so the next part is our action plan, where we address the 7 goals that we outlined, which include first and primary, increasing communication between CAN, stakeholders, and community. Then we're going to identify strengths and weaknesses through a SWOT, increase community engagement. Then there's a 2 phases of strategic alignment, and then professional development, and then increasing partnerships with stakeholders. Next slide. This is a detailed graphic organizer of the action plan that outlines our goals, objectives, supplies the resources, a timeline in which is to be completed, the responsible parties that are involved in that process of meeting those goals, the risk analysis for each task, as well as the indicators of success. So the first one is increase communication between CAN stakeholders and community, conduct communication audits, through communication surveys. Takes about 2 to 4 weeks. The director of CAN would be responsible for that. And it could, communication weaknesses should be revealed, and the survey would be completed as the indicator of success. Identify strengths and weaknesses. As previously mentioned, conducted a SWOT analysis. Employees and SWOT surveys would be conducted 2 to 4 weeks by the consultant. And internal weaknesses would probably be revealed during that process. And a thorough SWOT analysis is completed for the organization. Next, we would increase community engagement through some art-based research programs and doing some partnering with nonprofit organizations and the beneficiaries to highlight some of the successes that have resulted from CAN's work. Over a 6-month period, we develop an arts program committee to be responsible for that. And it may not connect stakeholders to the efficiency of CAN, but it could definitely again increase communication for CAN and also help branch out in the networking and improve or increase the number of services and people served. Other types of programs would include luncheons, plays and productions, art exhibits, and then social media broadcasts. Next is strategic alignment phase 1. This is a key instrument in revising the mission and vision and the sole purpose of CAN. Utilizing previous documents, the survey data and the SWOT data. It take 2 months. And the board of directors and the director of CAN would be involved in that process, which would reveal the focus may need a big shift. So, again, addressing the whys of the organization. And then a new vision and mission would be posted, emailed, and advertised, communicated out through CAN and the network, as well as all stakeholders and community. Phase 2 would develop goals. Those are strategic, operating, and tactical. Using data from those analysis and previous documents, and developing the new mission and vision. And again, may require a big shift. The next one is professional development, growth plans for the workplace effectiveness. A big part of the professional development would be to utilize webinars and seminars and getting professional development to where staff is rewarded through this process by implementing certifications, degrees, possible CEUs, and maybe even monetarily support that. And this would be conducted by the human resources, middle management, and the individual employees themselves. And it would reinforce the strategic alignment, and it would help us escape Artis's double loop of doing everything that's been going on and repeating the history just because it's the way it's been done with both management and investors, and getting out of that double loop theory. Next is increased partnerships with stakeholders. This would increase funding sources. And then it would be ongoing, and the board of directors and the director of CAN, of course, would operate and collaborate with that. It may show that there's a low rate of return for the work put in, for the amount of funding that's received, but donations and funding ideally would increase. This plan of action will best address the central problem along with several secondary problems, and will place the CAN organization on a path of longevity. With both qualitative and quantitative factors being assessed and improved. All this goes back to Kouzes and Posner's The 5 Practices of Exemplary Leadership, where we model the way, inspire a shared vision, and challenge the process. I was reminded of a story that Dr. Hamilton shared with me, talking about how the young wife cut the ham in half before she cooked it for Christmas. And the husband asked her, "Why'd you cut the ham in half?" And she said, "Well, that's the way it's always been done. That's the way my mom did it." Well, when the young wife went and asked her mom why she cut the ham in half, it's because it didn't fit the small oven that they had at the time. So just because it's the way it's been done doesn't mean it's the way that it has to be done, and it's not necessarily the most effective way. So definitely one of my favorite things is challenging the process. And then finally, it's important to remember, especially dealing with nonprofits, that we need to encourage the heart and continue to focus on the quantity, but more as well as the quality, and making sure that we're serving the purpose and the mission and vision of the organization.
In conclusion, we learned that it is necessary for organizations such as CAN to do work and to do some research to determine the organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. They need to do the work that makes their funding agencies continue to support them and their decisions. They need to use metrics to share with partnering agencies. However, we also discovered it's very complicated to measure organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. Nonprofits want to focus on the experience, while stakeholders and funding agencies want quantifiable metrics to identify problems and find solutions to problems. This causes tension in the nonprofit sector. The qualitative approach versus the quantification approach. As Reed previously stated, the battle between heart and good. And as Talia stated, they must learn to follow a business model approach to show results of their work to make their funding agencies happy. Ultimately, the role of communication is key in all organizations, especially in nonprofits and organizations where the bottom line is not the primary focus or mission. Communication helps maintain a balance between the funding agencies and the nonprofit, as well as within the nonprofit itself. Communication is especially important and especially key in this particular situation because CAN is a large collaboration of various types of nonprofits, and they have their own goals and their own objectives. So excellent communication is an absolute must for CAN. In the nonprofit sector, as previously stated, organizational effectiveness is a social construct, and organizational effectiveness only occurs if people believe and act as if it is real. Effectiveness is the perceived notion that the organization is effective in accomplishing its mission or its purpose. By following our action plan, CAN will be able to be successful and effective in accomplishing its mission and purpose and be known as an effective nonprofit organization. CAN will have lasting impact on the entire collaboration of nonprofits and on those individuals who benefit from its services. I will now turn it back over to Talia.
Thank you. These are our references. And throughout our presentation, we were able to answer all of the questions that were at the end of the case study. And we gave 7 recommendations throughout in our action plan. And on behalf of Group 4 Life, we would like to thank you for your time and attention. The floor is open for anyone with questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, opinions, or feedback. Thank you.
It's for all 4 groups. Okay. All right.
Dr. Lamb, you're on mute.
Dr. Lamb, you're muted.
You're on mute, Dr. Lamb.
Dr. Lamb, you're muted.
I want to do some closing comments here on Group 4 and for the day. It's all about continuous improvement. We have to, our plan study, do, act. It's a continuous loop. We've got to work all the time. It's not a one and done. Here, I wrote my strategic plan. I'm done. I put it on the shelf, or I do. Organizational improvement is a continuing thing. We have to know our numbers. We have to know our story. They have to continue to evolve. To that point, a couple things from what Reed said. Bar graphs, and I think one of your questions was, what kind of data conveyance figures do you use in your line of work? Bar graphs are wonderful in action research to show data over time, and that's one of the things that you really have to do to show organizational effectiveness. And is data over time. And that's one of the things that Reed pointed out. Also from Reed, that homeostasis between qualitative and quantitative people and concerns, that's what leadership is. That's your job, and it's a continuing, evolving thing, but you've got to keep that balance. And that's where that skill of leadership comes in. You've got to maintain that balance between the two and not let one overrun the other. From Sean's presentation on action plan, I was so pleased as I ran it earlier today. Professional development. You've got to develop everybody, not all of your stakeholders. You're probably going to have to do some training with all of them. That's got to be a part of your action plan. Now, it won't be the same for everybody, but you've got to tailor your professional development to each of the stakeholder groups. Don't assume that the United Way, the professional staff doesn't know not to steal the money. You've got to do all of it, and it starts with mission vision. You've got to bring everybody along and tailor professional development to each of your groups. If you don't do that, none of this will work. It'll just be a fist fight every time you get together. The qualitatives and the quantitatives will just fight it out all the time. if you don't do that professional development. One piece and you know, two things you got to understand that the number one job of any leader, you should have learned this in 730. Your number one job is to keep the organization alive, perpetuate continuous improvement, perpetuate the organization. You should have learned that in 730. Let's not forget that. And the other thing that's kind of a central theme for us in 738 is the problem with many nonprofits is there's a founder or a progenitor of that nonprofit, and you have to understand that self-report, and to them, it's because it's their baby, that self-report is the least reliable form of data. Let me say that again. If you don't remember it, write it down. If you don't take anything else away from all the rants that I give you, self-report is the least reliable form of data. That's your problem dealing with most nonprofits who have a founder, a developer, whoever started this thing. You have to understand that their perspective, the data that they give you will be self-report. It's not generally reliable. And you have to understand, that doesn't mean we just automatically discount it, but we have to understand that self-report is the least reliable form of data. And that's one of the problems dealing with nonprofits. If they have a founder or an XO or the person who started this thing, you know, that many times the data won't be clean or won't be actually actionable, and that's hard to do. And so to finish up from the case study today, we started out this morning with the reflection from Sharice that said the whole point of this case study is putting all these tools that we've learned together. Yay, you got it. That's what this is about. That's what this case study is about. Everything that you've learned, SWOT analysis, all these other things that you've been learning all the way along, this is when you get to demonstrate, oh, this is how I use that, because this is what you will do when you go out in real life scenarios. We do action research. We don't do theoretical. You've got to have a toolkit, and you've got to be able to know which of these to apply and how much and how often. Back to the last presentation, it's not an exact science, as Dr. Burgess said. It's not an exact science. You have to find that field, but you've got all these different tools at your disposal. You've got to know when to use what. That's the whole point of your consultancy, going out and actually partnering with an organization. And it's the point of our case studies that we do, and that's kind of the heart that kind of drives our instruction. Now, if you go back, it's just almost, I love it how a plan comes together here, the 18. You'll notice we've covered everything that we were supposed to cover in chapter 1 today, but we've done it in a practical way. That's what we'll do each week is we'll cover all the chapters of all the books, but we're not going to sit and read the PowerPoints. If you want to see the PowerPoint, I've got it right here. But if you go back and review that PowerPoint, oh, that's when we talked about that today, or that's when we did this. And so the notion here is we do action research. It's got to be live. It's got to be real. It can't be theoretical. You've got to have tools, know when to apply them. Leadership's not an exact, it's more of an art than an exact science, but we know there are good things to do and not to do. So be sure to review your Excel video, the 30 minutes, because we'll cover Excel next time. That's on our agenda. Again, we will reverse the order of our presentations. We will do case study 16A, which is the second of our case studies. We'll reverse the order and we'll do just what we did today. And look, we finished 7 minutes early. I was so impressed with your presentations. I want to thank my colleagues, Dr. Burgess and Dr. Neal, for their input today, their expertise. I am certainly enjoying having both of these groups together. Your perspectives are refreshing. The knowledge that you bring, the passion that you bring that with was exemplified in your presentations today. I was so pleased, and I'm so excited. I can't wait for 2 weeks to see y'all again. Turn your work in. I'll grade it and get it back to you as I always do, same day. And everybody, wear your mask, get your shots, behave yourself, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Good night or
Bye-bye.
good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks.